Chapter 1463 Seeking Life in the Midst of Death. He's done for, the cultivators exclaimed as they shook their heads. However, they were genuinely impressed that he was able to withstand that devastating heavenly tribulation until now. What Ling Han was facing was the fury of heaven and earth. The power of humans was limited, yet the power of heaven and earth was unlimited. As such, how could he withstand the punishment of heaven and earth? Not a single person thought that Ling Han wasn't a prodigy. However, even so, there was little more that he could do. Before the might of heaven and earth, even Genesis-tier saints had to bow their proud heads. If this weren't the case, saints should have been able to resist the fateful cycle of life, sickness, and death. They should have been able to transcend the regulations of heaven and earth. However, not only did saints have a limited lifespan, but they even had to face their own form of tribulation, immortal's tribulation. If they failed to withstand this, their life force would be mercilessly severed. This was enough to prove that heaven and earth could kill whomever they wanted. Once the will of heaven and earth was set, no one could possibly seek to change it. In any case, who told Ling Han to obtain such a great opportunity, advancing 2 minor levels at once? Now that he was facing a twofold heavenly tribulation, he had no option but to die with bitterness and regret. Moreover, who would have imagined that Ling Han's great opportunity would wound up becoming his great disaster? However, some people were extremely glad to witness his misfortune. Since they were unable to become a powerful king-tier themselves, they took great joy in witnessing the death of those powerful king-tiers. In fact, they yearned for everyone more powerful than themselves to be killed. That way, they would finally be able to make a name for themselves. This doesn't seem right. This brat isn't destined to die so young. The large black dog stopped chasing and biting people, standing up on his hind legs and clasping his front paws behind his back. An enigmatic aura emanated from him, and it was as if he were pondering a profound question. However, the sight of his iron underwear completely ruined his solemn and profound airs. Anyhow, he immediately revealed his true colors anyway, shaking his head and saying, "Forget about it. Whether he lives or dies has *T to do with Grandpa Dog." Ling Han's situation was becoming direr and direr. His heavenly tribulation was becoming increasingly powerful, and even with the protection of the indestructible heaven scroll, the speed of his recovery was still far slower than the speed at which he was getting wounded. From his head to toe, it was almost impossible to find any piece of unshattered bone. However, he was still fighting, determination and tenacity in his eyes. He would never give up. He would fight until the last moment. He had already summoned his divine demon sword long ago, this sword radiating with a brilliant celestial light as it resisted the attacks of the tribulation. Even though it was only a level 11 god tool, it was radiating an aura that could sow apprehension in one's heart. It possessed a wisp of might that should have only existed in celestial tools. Under the tempering of the twofold heavenly tribulation, the divine demon sword was also able to undergo a comprehensive qualitative improvement. Ling Han continued to circulate drops of indestructible true fluid, speeding up the process of his recovery. However, the effects of the indestructible true fluid would decrease significantly when used in quick succession. It wasn't long before he consumed all 10 drops of indestructible true fluid. However, the twofold heavenly tribulation was still attacking him without mercy. Quang! A bolt of lightning arced down, severing one of Ling Han's arms. Godly blood sprayed into the surroundings. However, this blood was full of vitality, and it provided nourishment to the piece of land that it fell on. The plants and trees in this area instantly grew with renewed vigor, shooting up 30 or so meters. Quang! Another bolt of lightning descended, severing one of Ling Han's legs. Similar to before, a large swathe of land in the distance was transformed into an Elysian-like area. Countless godly medicines sprouted and grew, many of them reaching level 9 or even level 10. Quang! This bolt of lethal lightning struck Ling Han's neck, almost ripping his body into 2. Blood exploded from his body and rained down on the surrounding lands, providing the entire abyss with vitality and nourishment. The abyss transformed from a land of desolation into a land of lush greenery. Quang. Heaven and earth were merciless, and they launched the killing blow. Pa. Ling Han was blasted into ashes. This time, Ling Han hadn't actively shattered his godly bones. Instead, he had genuinely been blasted into pieces. He's done for. A supreme king tier was killed just like that. This was a king tier who could rival the power of Gu Daoyi. Brilliant. Nie Tiancheng and Shan Jingyi both sneered in delight. They had both been screwed over by Ling Han before. Even though they had reached the peak again, they had both fallen to the floor of the abyss again because of that hanging dog incident. In the end, they had failed to receive any benefits. Upon witnessing the death of Ling Han, they were naturally beside themselves with delight. It was as if they had eaten some sweet honey. With Ling Han dead, his heavenly tribulation naturally started to dissipate as well. However, just as the dark clouds started to dissipate, they immediately started to converge together again. What's going on? Everyone was confused by this sudden change. Perhaps heaven and earth wanted to mutilate his corpse. However, not even a single fiber of Ling Han's being was remaining. So, how could heaven and earth mutilate his non-existent corpse? Boom! They suddenly saw a burst of flames materializing in the sky. This flame then frenziedly spread throughout the sky, a figure gradually appearing from within it. This figure rapidly took shape before eventually stepping out. It's Ling Han. Holy fuck. Everyone opened their eyes as wide as they could upon seeing this, their heads completely numb with shock. He was clearly killed by heavenly tribulation, with not even an iota of his body remaining. In fact, even his tribulation had started to dissipate, so how has he come back from the dead? Ling Han slowly stepped forward, the boundless flames being absorbed into his body as he did so. His spirit and vitality were elevated to the extreme. Indestructible heaven's scroll, rising from the ashes. There was a solemn expression on his face. This was his most powerful trump card, so what would he do if he were still unable to withstand this twofold heavenly tribulation? Quang. The tribulation continued to unleash violent strikes against him, the bolts of divine lightning becoming more and more powerful. This twofold heavenly tribulation had already lasted for almost 2 entire days. However, after unleashing a furious bolt of divine lightning, Ling Han's heavenly tribulation suddenly came to a stop, not unleashing any more attacks. Instead, the dark clouds dissipated, revealing the sun and bright sky that rested behind it. The terrifying heavenly tribulation had finally come to an end. Ling Han was riddled with wounds, and he heavily plunked down onto the ground. As strong as his willpower was, he still couldn't help but feel as if his body were about to collapse. Everyone gazed at him with respect and admiration in their eyes. In fact, there was even a hint of fear. It was as if they were looking at a freak, not a person. He had died, yet then come back to life again. Who had ever witnessed such an astounding scene before? Ling Han furrowed his brows. In order to overcome the heavenly tribulation, he had revealed his most powerful trump card in front of everyone else. As such, he would lose the element of surprise in the future. Fortunately, he still possessed another trump card. That was, of course, the Black Tower. It was even more indestructible than the indestructible Heaven's Scroll. In addition, he hadn't revealed the secret of the 9 Heavens Flame either. This was a trump card that was no weaker than the Black Tower. Gu Daoyi, come battle me. Ling Han shouted as he stood up. The battle between Gu Daoyi and Empress Wenxin had already reached a critical and intense stage. Moreover, Gu Daoyi was enjoying the advantage. Although Empress Wenxin was astonishingly powerful, she still couldn't overcome the tremendous power of Gu Daoyi, especially since he possessed a divine fetus. If it weren't for the brick in her hands, perhaps she would have already been defeated long ago. How could Ling Han watch on as his wife was being ruthlessly attacked? Gu Daoyi stopped his attacks and turned around to gaze at Ling Han. There was a wary look in his eyes. Even he would struggle if he were attacked by both Ling Han and Empress Wenxin. You want to battle against me? He asked in a menacing voice. Although husband and wife are one, I won't bully you this time. Let us battle, one against one. Ling Han extended his arm, preparing to battle. Although he was bathed in blood, his aura instantly rose explosively at this moment. A mere ant-like. Pung. Gu Daoyi was still expressing his disdain, yet Ling Han had already launched a punch toward him, forcing him to instantly swallow his words. He hurriedly retreated 900 or so meters. Again? Gu Daoyi was beside himself with fury. This was exactly the same as before. He had wanted to mock and ridicule Ling Han, yet his words were forced back into his mouth by Ling Han's attacks every single time. He couldn't string together a single complete sentence. Detestable. Gu Daoyi gave up on trying to ridicule Ling Han. He was going to kill Ling Han. Mystical power of 10 lives. The mystical powers of all his lifetimes were unleashed one after another. In the end, they all combined to form a devastating combination attack. 9 other clones of Gu Daoyi then appeared, each representing one of his past lives. Attacking in unison, they unleashed the 10 mystical powers which then surged toward Ling Han. This time, he was attacking while at his full power. Moreover, he even had a Saint tool in his hands. He was tremendously powerful. Ling Han smiled calmly, not hiding his own power either. He immediately unleashed Heaven's Might, forcefully suppressing Gu Daoyi's power by 2 stars. At the same time, he slashed down with his divine demon sword, sending brilliant celestial light into the surroundings. Raising his hand, boundless rays of divine light instantly shot outward, their brightness so great that the spectating cultivators could barely open their eyes. The cultivators in the second stage had mastered the sun physique with just a wisp of the sunstone's power. However, Ling Han had been cultivating inside this sunstone. Thus, the sum of the benefits received by all of the other cultivators was negligible before the benefits that Ling Han had received. It was also because of this that he had been able to advance from the early stage of the high extreme to the peak stage of the pinnacle level. In fact, if it weren't for the immense difficulty presented by the barrier to the Eternal River tier, Ling Han could have advanced even further. However, if he had genuinely broken through to the Eternal River tier, he would have been met with a threefold heavenly tribulation. If that had been the case, he definitely would have been killed. Gu Daoyi couldn't help but feel vexed. Chapter 1464 Recruiting Disciples. To other cultivators, obtaining the sun physique was something to be very happy about. However, to Gu Daoyi, obtaining this mystical power was essentially the same as obtaining nothing. At most, it could only elevate his power by a minuscule amount. However, once Ling Han unleashed his sun physique, it caused his Dazzle the Heavens mystical power to appear dull and muted. One had to realize that the entire sun rock had almost all been refined by Ling Han alone. Thus, he possessed a sun physique that had reached the stage of great accomplishment. This sun physique wasn't the same as the sun physique of the other cultivators. Once it appeared, it unleashed a dazzling light and even a burst of scorching heat. In fact, the sun stone hadn't been used to just seal the 9 heavens flame. Rather, the 9 heavens flame had been born from within this sun stone, eventually growing into one of the 9 great ancestral flames. Indeed, this sun stone was a very freakish stone. Perhaps cultivating the sun physique to a stage of great accomplishment still wasn't enough for it to be qualified as a top-notch physique in the celestial realm. However, it was still definitely more powerful than Dazzle the Heavens. After all, Dazzle the Heavens was a mystical power that Gu Daoyi had mastered in his first life. Taking all of his mystical powers into account, only his divine fetus would be able to suppress Ling Han's sun physique. Gu Daoyi humphed coldly, and said, "You've stolen my fortune and great opportunities. I'm definitely going to kill you." If he could obtain this physique, his Dazzle the Heavens would definitely elevate to a whole new level. Indeed, its improvement would certainly be far more than what he had received from the blessing of heaven and earth. Moreover, he had a feeling that Ling Han had received even more benefits than just this. Otherwise, he wouldn't have felt a sensation of apprehension just then. One had to realize that he possessed a divine fetus. what kind of precious treasure did Ling Han possess? It was something that could provoke even his divine fetus. Dumb C*NT. Ling Han said with a cold sneer. He raised his divine demon sword, releasing a boundless sword chi as he did so. His aura was no weaker than that of Gu Daoyi. Humph. You think I'm afraid of you? Gu Daoyi roared as a brilliant light enveloped his body. Numerous symbols materialized on his body, and it was as if he had put on a suit of scaled armor. Surprisingly, he was able to obstruct the effect that was being released by Ling Han's Heaven's Might. However, this was only effective on his own body. The 9 clones that represented his 9 previous lives were still affected by the power of Heaven's Might. This was the power of his divine fetus. Ling Han's eyes lit up, and he immediately activated the Eye of Truth. He wanted to observe the symbols on Gu Daoyi's body more closely. It was very likely that these symbols contained some of the secrets of his divine fetus, and it was very likely that they were celestial patterns. Such patterns had also materialized when he had been refining the 9 heavens flame. However, compared to those, the celestial patterns of Gu Daoyi's divine fetus were naturally far inferior. After all, the 9 heavens flame was an ancestral flame of the celestial realm. It was an ancestral flame that could rival even celestial kings. However, Ling Han still couldn't comprehend these patterns. Ling Han felt that this was a pity. These celestial patterns were far too complicated. Even if he concentrated on just one, it would still take him an incredibly long time to comprehend and grasp. Moreover, there were at least tens of thousands of these celestial patterns. Forget about it. It's time to battle. Ling Han slashed his sword as he advanced toward Gu Daoyi. There was the rumble of thunder, and there was also the brilliance of the sun. However, Gu Daoyi was no pushover either. He had a saint tool in his hands, and his original body was more so at its full power. He was no weaker than Ling Han. Although the power of his 9 clones had all been suppressed by 2 stars, they could still unleash a devastating might when they released their mystical powers in unison. However, what kind of physique did Ling Han possess? He didn't dare to face the attack of Gu Daoyi's 10th generation body saint tool head-on. However, he couldn't care less about the 9 clones that represented Gu Daoyi's 9 previous lives. So be it if their attack struck him. At most, he would only receive some very minor injuries. Meanwhile, Gu Daoyi also didn't dare to be struck by Ling Han's divine demon sword. This was a devastating sword that possessed immense destructive abilities. In fact, it was so powerful that it could even hack celestials to death. The 2 Supreme King tiers became locked in an intense battle. Their power was similar, and they continued to exchange blow after blow. Ling Han didn't unleash the 9 heavens flame. This was his trump card, and unless he was confident that he could kill Gu Daoyi, he definitely wouldn't unleash it. Right now, it was clear that he couldn't kill Gu Daoyi. They were on Wood Figure Planet right now, and thus they were all under the observation of the 10 saints of this planet. The divine senses of these saints were always watching over this planet. Cultivators like him, Gu Daoyi, second in the world, and the others were all the Supreme King tiers of their generation. Thus, how could these saints allow them to be killed? Apart from heavenly tribulation, which they couldn't interfere with, these saints would definitely appear to help if any of them was at risk of dying. That being the case, Ling Han obviously wouldn't reveal his trump cards prematurely. Sure enough, after exchanging several more blows, a saint suddenly appeared to stop the battle between Ling Han and Gu Daoyi. Under his saintly might, Ling Han and Gu Daoyi were unable to launch any more attacks. This was the case even though they were unafraid of his saintly might. Of course, this was only because they were incredibly powerful. Most of the other cultivators had already dropped to their knees. This was the 9 Azure Saint, the 9th disciple of the Star Sand Saint. At 300 million years old, he was also the youngest saint in the surrounding several hundred galaxies. It could be said that he was in his prime, and his chi and blood was at its most vigorous. He looked like a well-read middle-aged man, an indescribably graceful aura radiating from him even though his appearance was only ordinary. His aura was profound enough to move one's heart. This was a saint, someone who had reached the pinnacle of this realm. Thus, he naturally possessed a mighty and profound aura. When a saint was born, the heavens would rain a sweet dew to welcome their birth. When a saint died, the heavens would cry as the world grieved their passing. Everyone immediately head to the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. The recruitment process is about to begin. The 9 Azure Saint waved his hand as he said this, enveloping all of the cultivators and flying them to the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. How quick was the speed of a saint? Moreover, this was under the condition that they weren't tearing apart and teleporting through space. Otherwise, they could arrive on another planet in a single stride. The Star Sand Martial Arts Academy appeared before their eyes. In fact, there were actually 9 campuses of the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy, each of them guarded by one of the Star Sand Saints' disciples. These saints would also be responsible for teaching the disciples in their own campus. Right now, they were at the 9th campus, the campus of the 9 Azure Saint. Sit here and wait. The recruitment process will begin in 3 days, the 9 Azure Saint announced. This was the request of a saint, and even someone as rebellious as Gu Daoyi didn't dare to go against his words. After all, he was only a measly cultivator at the heavenly body tier at this moment. A saint could kill him with a single thought. Everyone was very well behaved as they sat there quietly, waiting for 3 days to pass. Empress Wenxin and the others all ran over to Ling Han. They hadn't seen each other for 10 years. Ling Han embraced the heavenly phoenix divine maiden in his left arm and Empress Wenxin in his right arm. He then briefly filled them in about his encounters. Of course, he naturally couldn't go into much detail in such a public area. After all, the existence of the celestial realm was a very significant matter. 3 days passed by in a flash, and many more people arrived before the 9th campus of the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. In addition to the king tiers who had participated in the competition in the Sunken Abyss Valley, there were also many more cultivators at the Mountain River tier and Sun Moon tier. Qualifying to enter the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy wasn't based on cultivation level alone. Rather, the recruitment was based on one's talent, comprehension ability, and physique. It didn't matter if one's cultivation level was low. After all, this was something that could eventually be raised. However, there were some natural characteristics that couldn't be changed, regardless of how high one's cultivation level was. If one wanted to become a saint, cultivation level definitely wasn't the key. Anyhow, the minimum requirement for entering the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy was reaching the pinnacle level in at least one major tier. Thus, there were only around 3,000 or so prospective disciples at this campus. Among them, there were over 2,900 rank 1 king tiers. There were far fewer rank 2 king tiers, only 300 or so. Meanwhile, there were only a measly 12 rank 3 king tiers. Apart from Empress Wenxin, Gu Daoyi, Long Xianyue, and the 4 others, Ling Han was a newly advanced rank 3 king tier. Regarding the 4 others, these were king tiers who had arrived not long ago. Because of this matter or that matter, these rank 3 king tiers hadn't managed to make it in time to participate in the competition in the Sunken Abyss Valley. The 9 saints are about to recruit disciples. At this moment, an Eternal River tier elite walked out from the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy and announced the beginning of the recruitment process. Each person will be called up, and the 9 saints will decide whether or not they want to take you as a disciple. If only one saint shows interest, then you'll be taken as a disciple of that saint. If 2 or more saints show interest, then you can decide which saint you want to become a disciple of. Gu Daoyi. The elite called out the first name. Chapter 1465 The Greatest Prodigy of All Eternity. The first person to be called up was naturally the prodigy the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy valued the most. Gu Daoyi, the greatest prodigy of all eternity. Everyone gazed at Gu Daoyi with envy. He was publicly acknowledged as the most powerful prodigy. His physique was extraordinary, and he was more so capable of suppressing all other beings. However, it was a shame that he had failed to gain an overwhelming advantage over Empress Wenxin or Ling Han. This left a slight blemish on his name. However, even so, the 9 saints still held him in higher regard, placing his name first. He had received the appreciation of saints. This was an incredible honor. Commotion instantly swept through the crowd of prodigies. In fact, the eyes of many of them went red with jealousy. In reality, Gu Daoyi didn't need to view saints with any respect. After all, he had once been a grand elder at the severing mundane tier. However, after living 10 lives, his personality had also become that of a young person. This was more so the case seeing that he had failed to defeat Ling Han and Empress Wenxin after battling against them so many times. This irritated him greatly. Now that he was called up first, it was as if his name was being redeemed. This made him feel slightly smug and happy. He was brimming with pride as he walked forward. There was a large expanse of empty land before them, and the 9 saints were each seated on a stone lotus around this empty land. These stone lotuses were only 9 meters tall, yet wherever there was a saint, the land around them would become a saintly land. The expanse of empty land was illuminated by a soft divine light, with an intoxicating fragrance wafting from its surface. Fresh and blooming flowers also fluttered down from the sky as if they were celebrating a grand event. "I desire to take him as my disciple," a saint said. "I desire to take him as my disciple," another saint said. "I desire to take him as my disciple. I desire to take him as my disciple." The 9 saints spoke one after another, all of them expressing their desire to take Gu Daoyi as their disciple. The 3,000 or so prodigies were all filled with jealousy when they saw this. These were 9 saints. Yet, they had all expressed their desire to take Gu Daoyi as their disciple. This was a profound honor. There was pride and haughtiness in Gu Daoyi's mind. In his eyes, even saints didn't have the right to take him as a disciple. However, he was only at the heavenly body tier right now, so what could he do about this? He had already completed the majority of his preparations in the Medicine King's cave. If he wanted to return to the Genesis tier as soon as possible, he would definitely have to rely on external help and power. The Star Sand Martial Arts Academy was his best choice. His aim was to win the appreciation of the Star Sand Saint so that he could be accepted as his 10th disciple. If that were to occur, he would obtain boundless resources from the Star Sand Saint, and would then have the confidence to become a Saint King in just 1,000 years. At that time, he could tear open a passageway to the celestial realm and return to his homeland. He would then be able to attend to his unfinished business. In this life, he, Gu Daoyi, was going to become a king tier of the celestial realm. He was going to battle for fortune with the true sons and true daughters of those powerful sects. "Gu Daoyi, whom do you wish to take as master?" the Star Sand Saint's 6th disciple, the Peaceful Radiant Saint, asked. Gu Daoyi pondered this for a moment. Right now, he still didn't have the right to directly become a disciple of the Star Sand Saint. It was evident that the Star Sand Saint still needed to observe their character and talents such that he could pick his favorite prodigy out of the 900 disciples. He would then take this prodigy as his direct disciple, and teach them with all of his heart and care. It was a shame that Gu Daoyi couldn't announce that he had once been a grand elder at the severing mundane tier. Wouldn't it mean reaching the Genesis tier be mere child's play for him? However, if he truly announced this, how could he be sure that these saints wouldn't try to steal the fruits of his cultivation? He was feeling slightly regretful now. He hadn't killed Ling Han at that time, and he had allowed this hidden danger to grow more powerful. This was all because he had been worked up and convinced by Ling Han's words at that time. In fact, he couldn't have killed Ling Han even if he had wanted to. After all, Ling Han still had the Black Tower. Gu Daoyi pondered for a moment longer before answering, "I want to become a disciple of the Black River Saint." The Black River Saint was the first disciple of the Star Sand Saint. His power was profound, and it was rumored that he might have already become a medium saint. However, Gu Daoyi clearly hadn't chosen him because of this reason. Rather, it was because he felt that the Black River Saint was just barely worthy of teaching and helping him, being the first disciple of the Star Sand Saint and all. Very well, the Black River Saint said with a nod. He gestured with his hand, and Gu Daoyi instantly flew before the lotus platform that he was sitting on. There were 900 spots, and one of them had already been taken. Ling Han, the Eternal River Tier elite from before called. Only in the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy would an Eternal River Tier elite become a mere host of an event. Ling Han was the second prodigy to be called over. The prodigies all wore strange expressions. The competition in the Sunken Abyss Valley had been a battle between the most powerful king tiers, where only one person could ascend the peak. Ling Han had emerged victorious in that competition, with Empress Wenxin helping him hold Gu Daoyi back. However, in this competition, he had been beaten by Gu Daoyi. It was clear that the saints held Gu Daoyi's physique in higher regard. I desire to take him as my disciple. I desire to take him as my disciple. I desire to take him as my disciple. The 9 saints almost all spoke in unison. Although they held Ling Han in slightly lower regard, this was mainly because of his natural physique. However, he was still a piece of rare jade that was worth their effort in carving. This was also the reason why Ling Han was the second king tier to be called over. Of course, he was still inferior to Gu Daoyi. After all, that was a divine fetus. His future prospects were boundless. In fact, even their master, the Star Sand Saint, had wanted to directly take Gu Daoyi as his disciple. However, thinking about it carefully, he decided to also give the other prodigies a chance and some encouragement. With this in mind, he suppressed his urge to directly take Gu Daoyi as his disciple. With the appearance of Gu Daoyi, the other prodigies were all destined to become dull and lackluster, regardless of how freakishly prodigious they were. The gulf between them was far too large, so large that they didn't even have the right to compete against him. Ling Han, what's your decision? The Black River Saint asked. Ling Han's expression was calm, yet he was actually feeling extremely pissed off. Why was he viewed as inferior to Gu Daoyi? They had battled against each other twice, and he hadn't been at a disadvantage either time. In fact, there were still many powerful trump cards that he hadn't used yet. If they fought to the death, rising from the ashes would even provide him with 2 extra lifelines. That being the case, how could he not kill Gu Daoyi? With this in mind, why had he been called up after Gu Daoyi? Had he lost? In the eyes of these saints, it was evident that one's physique was still more important. Gu Daoyi possessed a divine fetus. Fine. I'm eager to see your expressions when one day I eventually tread on the face of Gu Daoyi. Ling Han mulled over his options. In reality, he didn't mind which campus he entered. After all, he had just obtained a large pile of secret techniques. Although these secret techniques couldn't be regarded as paramount when viewed in the context of the celestial realm, each one of them would definitely be profound enough to move the saints of the immortal realm. He swept his gaze over them before answering, I want to become a disciple of the Tranquil Heart Saint. The 9 saints were slightly astonished. Although they were all saints, there were still differences in their power and abilities. Among the 9 saints, the Black River Saint was the most powerful. Moreover, he also specialized in using the sword. Thus, regardless of the situation, Ling Han should have chosen to become a disciple of the Black River Saint, and yet he didn't. Was it because of Gu Daoyi? However, why had he chosen the Tranquil Heart Saint? Among the 9 saints, the 4th Saint Hardship Alchemy and the 8th Saint Tranquil Heart were slightly more peculiar. They weren't pure cultivators, but rather cultivators who had become saints through alchemy and formations, respectively. Perhaps Ling Han wanted to muck around and learn about formations from the Tranquil Heart Saint? However, becoming a saint through practicing formations was far too difficult. In the past billions of years, only the Tranquil Heart Saint had succeeded in doing so. It was abundantly clear just how difficult this path was. Very well, the Tranquil Heart Saint said. He had indeed become a saint through practicing formations. However, how profoundly powerful were saints? Could he not guide a measly cultivator at the heavenly body tier? He gestured with his hand, and Ling Han instantly flew before the lotus platform that he was sitting on. Empress. Wenxin. The Eternal River Tier elite was slightly hesitant as he looked at the list of names before him. This person was actually using a title as their name? Moreover, her title was Empress? He couldn't help but feel displeased. However, the fact that she was ranked third spoke volumes about her talent and abilities, as well as the value that the saints placed on her. Although his cultivation was higher at this moment, the fact that Empress Wenxin had managed to rise above all other prodigies and rank third among them proved that her future prospects were definitely limitless. Only one more saint could appear, but what was to stop her from advancing to the pinnacle level of the Eternal River Tier and becoming a pseudo-saint? Thus, he forcefully suppressed his feeling of displeasure, not allowing it to show on his face. Empress Wenxin gracefully walked over. Although she was breathtakingly beautiful and charming, with the ability to swoon millions upon millions of men, she was actually an incredibly proud and haughty woman. In her eyes, everyone was no more than an insect. Only one person deserved her love and attention. The crowd of prodigies suddenly fell silent, all of them intoxicated by the Empress' charm and beauty. Chapter 1466 Establishing Dominance. The Empress was domineering, and her figure was more so mesmerizing and tremendously charming. To say nothing of the young King Tiers becoming speechless and intoxicated, even the 9 saints were slightly swayed by her beauty. It was abundantly clear just how captivating the Empress was. I desire to take her as my disciple. I desire to. One after another, the 9 saints all expressed their desire to take her as a disciple. However, before they had even finished speaking, Empress Wenxin had already walked before the lotus platform of the Tranquil Heart Saint, standing beside Ling Han. How could she have chosen otherwise? At this moment, the 9 saints all wore slightly dark expressions. What's with this? We haven't even finished speaking, yet you've already made your decision. Do you still have any respect for US saints? If it had been any other person, they would have definitely been scolded by the saints even if it were Gu Daoyi. However, upon seeing Empress Wenxin's breathtaking beauty, none of the saints could steel their hearts to chide her. They felt that her pride was acceptable. After all, who told her to be so beautiful? In any case, she was also a supreme King Tier. They would make an exception just this once. Long Xiangyue. The fourth person to be called up was Long Xiangyue. She was a mighty woman, and she appeared much like a true dragon in human form. She would exude a domineering aura wherever she stood. Although she was the fourth person to be called up, this was still a tremendously impressive result. However, there wasn't much joy on her face. In the eyes of the others, being called up fourth was already an incredibly outstanding result. In her eyes, however, this was a humiliating result. Her goal had been first place. However, a temporary failure didn't preclude eternal failure. One day, she would definitely defeat those 3 people and become the sole King Tier of the younger generation. This was because she was the descendant of a true dragon. Her bloodline was extremely pure, and thus she was destined to become a mighty being who peered down upon all other beings. She chose to become the disciple of the second saint, the Dawn Cloud Saint. This was the only female saint among the 9 saints. She was also a half-human, with the other half of her bloodline coming from the ancient divine beast, the Stone Origin Tortoise. This was the most suitable choice for Long Xiangyue. They were both females, and they both possessed the bloodline of an ancient divine beast. Second in the world. Zi Chenfeng. The Supreme King Tiers were called up one after another. They then chose their campus and which saint they would become a disciple of. However, only rank 3 King Tiers had the right to be desired by all 9 of the saints. When it came to the rank 2 King Tiers, apart from the Rain Emperor and the Notionless Saint, the other King Tiers were only desired by a few of the saints. The later one was called up, the less likely they would be desired by the saints. Moreover, after the recruitment of the rank 2 King Tiers, the rank 1 King Tiers could barely raise any interest from the 9 saints. If they were desired by none of the 9 saints, they would be brutally eliminated from the recruitment. However, there were also several rank 1 King Tiers who managed to pique the saints' interest. Although they hadn't been impressive enough to be desired by all of the 9 saints, they had still been able to garner the interest of 3 or 4 of the saints. This was a fairly impressive feat. One of these king tiers was called Wu Jingfu, a man who had a bright and dazzling moon hovering behind his back. This wasn't a moon that represented the sun-moon tier. Rather, this was a moon that represented his rare physique, the bright moon physique. The radiance of this moon could allow one's power to rise explosively. This was an incredibly powerful ability, and it could lead to astonishing results when he was engaged in group battles. Thus, he garnered interest from several saints. In the end, Wu Jingfu chose to become a disciple of the 3rd saint, the Torrential Rain Saint. There was also a person called Lu Kansi, a man whose left arm was surprisingly a spear at birth. Following the advance of his cultivation, the length of this spear would also continue to grow, its power comparable to that of godly metal of the same level. This was also an incredibly rare physique, the weapon physique. Those who possessed this physique would have a weapon as a body part from birth. Lu Kansi became a disciple of the 5th saint, the Iron Saber Saint. This was because the Iron Saber Saint also possessed a weapon physique. As such, he would naturally be his best mentor. The Notionless Saint, Ding Ping, Jiuyao, and the Rain Emperor all received interest from several of the saints. However, among them, only Jiuyao received interest from the Tranquil Heart Saint. Thus, only Jiuyao managed to enter the 8th campus of the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. The Rain Emperor, the Notionless Saint, and the others all entered other campuses. Meanwhile, the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden was also quite fortunate. Although her talent wasn't outstanding, she was still accepted by the Dawn Cloud Saint. Perhaps this was because there weren't too many female king tiers. Half a day passed, and the recruitment of the 900 disciples finally came to an end. Those who hadn't been chosen could only leave in disappointment. It would be another 1,000,000 years before the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy opened up for its next cycle of recruitment. Apart from the disciples of the 9th campus, the other disciples were all led away by their respective saints. The 9 campuses were located all over the various corners of the Wood Figure planet, the distance between each of them relatively large. Even for a heavenly body tier elite, it would take them 10 or so days to travel to the nearest campus. The Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden was especially reluctant to leave Ling Han. She had just discovered the taste of love, and she wanted nothing more than to be entangled with Ling Han all day long. However, she could only choose to bid him farewell now. Anyhow, she could head over to meet Ling Han after they both settled down. Lu Juntian was also present among the disciples. Right now, there was a complicated expression in his eyes as he looked at Ling Han. However, in its depths, there was still a seething killing intent. Among all of the king tiers, Ling Han's talent had ranked a lofty 2nd. This outcome swayed his conviction significantly. Should he look ahead and forget about seeking revenge on Ling Han? However, the death of his brother was still burning in his mind. He couldn't forget this enmity. That being the case, he would bide his time until he was powerful enough. When the time was ripe, he would strike suddenly and kill Ling Han. Ling Han noticed Lu Juntian's gaze, and killing intent involuntarily rose up in his mind. If he had a chance, he would also kill Lu Juntian. Otherwise, leaving this person alive would only mean trouble. In fact, it wasn't just Lu Juntian who felt animosity toward Ling Han. There was also Nie Tiancheng, Shan Jingyi, and even some prodigies who despised him because of his relationship with Empress Wenxin. Of the people that Ling Han was acquainted with, Faceless passed the recruitment and became a disciple of the 3rd saint. Yang Lin also passed, becoming a disciple of the 7th saint. However, the Cloud Maiden and Yuing had both been brutally eliminated. They could only leave with hurt and disappointment. Of course, the Stone Emperor and the North Emperor passed the recruitment. Sure enough, they were like 2 peas in a pod, with both of them becoming a disciple of the 9 Azure Saint. There wasn't much time for them to bid farewell to each other before they all had to set off toward their respective campuses. In any case, they would have heaps of time to catch up with each other in the future. With a wave of his hand, the Tranquil Heart Saint collected his 100 or so disciples. Then, in the blink of an eye, they arrived before the 8th campus. This was a campus that rested on an azure mountain. This was an unfathomably tall mountain, and raising their heads, they could only see thick and swirling mists. A saint naturally wouldn't be tasked with helping them settle in. There was an eternal river tier elite responsible for this, and he led them to a stretch of courtyards. He then tossed them a bunch of tags, and said, "Take a tag each. You can unlock the courtyard that corresponds to the number on the tag. This will be your home from now on. Inside your residences, there's also a jade scroll. If you read the information inside this scroll, you'll naturally learn about the rules of the Martial Arts Academy." After saying this, he gracefully took his leave. Eternal River tier elites were naturally very busy. Just as Ling Han and the others were about to enter the gate to the courtyards, they suddenly saw the gate open by itself. A dozen or people walked out, blocking the entrance to the courtyards. The leader of this group swept his gaze over them before saying with a snicker, "How come all of the new recruits are trash this time? Does trash have the right to enter through the main gate? All of you, crawl in through this dog flap." He pointed to the side of the main gate. Sure enough, there was a dog flap there. Looking at this dog flap, how could the new recruits not know that this was the older disciples trying to establish dominance over them? Moreover, the man who was standing in their path was an Eternal River tier elite. Chapter 1467 Fighting Back. There was a tradition in the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. That was, the senior disciples would establish dominance over the new disciples and take them a notch down. This was because those who could enter this academy were all supreme prodigies. At the very least, they were all king tiers. Which king tier wasn't proud and haughty? Thus, they needed to take these new disciples a few notches down. They needed to make them realize that there were heavens beyond the heavens. Cultivating in the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy for 1 million years. What kind of concept was this? Moreover, some of these senior disciples had already cultivated here for more than 1 million years. Perhaps they had been here for 2, 5, or even 10 million years. The man leading them was called Yi Gaoning, and he was a disciple who had entered the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy 3 million years ago. At that time, he had also been a young king tier. However, because he had cultivated for several million years less than the older disciples at that time, he had naturally suffered a brutal initiation upon entering. He had advanced to the Eternal River tier 700,000 years ago, and thus he was naturally brimming with confidence and feeling as haughty as could be. Moreover, the senior disciples who had bullied him at that time had already left the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. Meanwhile, those who hadn't left were all more powerful than him. He wouldn't dare to provoke them. Thus, he turned his attention to these new disciples of the academy. It had already become a tradition to take new disciples down by a notch. Yi Gaoning pointed at the dog flap. This entrance hadn't been dug out recently. Rather, it had already existed for hundreds of millions of years. Each new disciple would be forced to crawl through this dog flap, regardless of whether they were a supreme king tier or not. Before Eternal River tier elites, they were as weak as could be. In any case, this dog flap wouldn't be the end of the new disciples' torture. There would still be many more things waiting for them. This was going to be a long and unforgettable day for the new disciples. His Eternal River tier aura rippled through the surroundings, sinister and mighty. So what if these new disciples were king tiers? They couldn't help but shudder in apprehension. However, there were two exceptions: Ling Han and Empress Wenxin. They were both at the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier, meaning that their power had already reached the low extreme of the Eternal River tier. Moreover, their battle prowess was on par with those at the late stage or even peak stage of the low extreme. Trying to suppress them with an Eternal River tier aura? Perhaps a saintly aura would be more effective. Yi Gaoning's eyes widened in surprise, and he instantly raised the might of his aura 100-fold. A senior disciple stepped forward, pointing at the new disciples and roaring, "What are you all standing there for? Hurry up and crawl in. He was slightly weaker than Yi Gaoning, and he was only at the consummate level of the heavenly body tier. By the looks of it, he couldn't reach the pinnacle level either. Otherwise, he would be a rank 3 king tier. However, before this recruitment cycle, even the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy hadn't been able to recruit a single rank 3 king tier. To say nothing of rank 3 king tiers, even rank 2 king tiers were pitifully rare. Thus, this person was most likely a rank 1 king tier. Moreover, he had probably become a rank 1 king tier through reaching the pinnacle level of the Mountain River tier. Hurry up. Or perhaps you want senior brother E to use force, another person shouted. In the past, these people had all crawled through the dog flap and been tortured by their seniors. Thus, they were naturally burning to take their anger out on someone. When the new disciples arrived, they could naturally unleash all of their negative emotions and bad memories on the new generation of disciples. Why? One of the new disciples asked in indignance. This is the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. Do you people dare to make trouble? What a joke. Since you know this is a martial arts academy, you should also know that might is right, one of the seniors said with a sneer. If you don't want to be beaten daily, then obediently crawl through this dog flap. Otherwise, what awaits you is a fate far crueler than this. Forget about it. Let me tell you a story. He started to tell the new disciples a story. Indeed, not every new disciple would yield to the older disciples and obediently crawl through the dog flap. Some of them would resist, yet these people would all be suppressed. They would then be forced to comply. There were also some who chose to flee from the older disciples and seek help from the teachers of the academy. However, this would be useless. There was no shortage of Eternal River tier elites among the disciples, with some of them even at the high extreme or consummate level. Thus, what could the teachers do about them? These older disciples could choose to ignore them. As such, seeking help would lead to an even crueler fate. Those who sought help would be stripped naked, and then forced to crawl through the dog flap. This was even more humiliating. However, this was their only option if they wanted to be let free. This was tradition, and no one could be exempt. Even the mighty higher-ups of the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy had suffered this brutal initiation when they had first entered the academy. After hearing these stories, the resolve of the young king tiers started to waver. They had heard a few well-renowned names. These were mighty figures who were rumored to be at least at the high extreme of the Eternal River tier. However, even they had suffered this fate upon entering the academy. They had also been forced to crawl through this dog flap. Now, however, they were all mighty and paramount. They were the most powerful disciples whom even the teachers didn't dare to provoke. I guess I'll crawl in. This is tradition, after all. The king tiers all lowered their proud and noble heads, crawling through the dog flap one after another. However, this wasn't the end. Rather, this was just the beginning of an entertaining show. Since the new disciples had already bowed their heads and abandoned their dignity, their resistance would only become weaker and weaker as time passed. Smiles stretched across the faces of the older disciples, and they chuckled in delight as they pointed at the new disciples. Meanwhile, some of them wore expressions of recollection. It was as if they could see a shadow of themselves on the bodies of these new disciples. However, they had finally pushed through that torturous period. Now, it was they who were suppressing the new disciples. There were only 100 new disciples, so even if their movements were slow, how long would it take for all of them to crawl through the dog flap? Why are you three still standing there? A senior disciple asked as he glared at Ling Han and the others. The other king tiers were all lining up before the dog flap, with 7 or 8 of them still yet to crawl through. However, these 3 new disciples remained standing where they were, calm and composed as if this had nothing to do with them. It was as if they were watching a show. What else should we be doing? Ling Han asked with a smile. Come over here and line up. Then crawl through the dog flap, the senior disciple replied. You don't even know how to crawl through a dog flap, another senior disciple asked with a cold sneer. They all felt a rush of excitement upon seeing the king tiers being humiliated. Perhaps this was also one of the reasons why this tradition hadn't been abandoned even after so many years. I genuinely don't. Why don't you people demonstrate it for me? After all, I'm sure you all have a lot of experience, Ling Han replied with a casual smile. There wasn't a hint of anger on his face. Gasp. However, his words managed to enrage all of the senior disciples. He was clearly opening up old wounds. The older disciples had all been mentally scarred by this, and it was only through becoming the oppressors themselves that they could wash away their humiliation. Regardless, their experiences were still a torturous stain in their memory. Yet, Ling Han had actually dared to mention this? He was asking for a beating. A senior disciple stepped forward, saying, "There are always some difficult disciples. By the looks of it, it's you three this time." He swept his gaze over them. However, his gaze suddenly stopped when it arrived at Empress Wenxin. His jaw involuntarily dropped, and there was a stunned expression on his face. Her demeanor was far too intoxicating. Even though he hadn't witnessed her appearance, his heart was already starting to race. It was beating so fast that it seemed like it were about to jump out from his chest. "Master, I'll deal with them," Biyao said as he stepped forward. During the competition in the Sunken Abyss Valley, he hadn't had the chance to battle against the other powerful elites. Thus, he was itching to fight at this moment. Ling Han pondered for a moment before nodding and replying, "Go ahead." After receiving the benefits from the Sunstone, Biyao had already advanced to the middle stage of the low extreme of the heavenly body tier. Meanwhile, the senior disciple before them was also only at the low extreme of the heavenly body tier. Even though he was at the peak stage, Ling Han was confident that Biyao wouldn't be at a disadvantage. Come battle. Biyao was burning with fighting spirit. He wanted to see just how powerful the disciples of the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy were. "Junior brother, this senior brother will give you some guidance today. Even if we're both king tiers, I'll show you just how large the gulf between us can be." His body shuddered, and a black mist started to flow out from beneath his feet. This black mist then enveloped both him and Biyao. This was one of his ultimate techniques. This black mist could obstruct his opponent's vision and senses, thereby reducing their battle prowess by at least 50 to 60%. Wang! A brilliant light suddenly exploded from within the black mist. This light was like the sun, and it instantly dispersed the thick cloud of black mist. Chapter 1468 Troublemakers. Sun Physique. Ling Han had ascended the gigantic golden boulder above the Sunken Abyss Valley and obtained the greatest opportunity. However, his success had also allowed the others to obtain more benefits. With the blessing of heaven and earth lasting for so long, those who had reached the second stage had all absorbed some of the essence of the Sunstone. This had allowed their cultivation to advance, and had even allowed them to obtain the Sun Physique. Of course, these were far inferior to the great accomplishment stage Sun Physique that Ling Han had obtained. However, this was only the immortal realm, and thus even an iota of power from the celestial realm was already more than impressive enough. Biyao was as radiant as the sun as he dispersed the black mist. "What?" the 12 or so senior disciples exclaimed in astonishment. "What cultivation technique is this? It's actually capable of dispersing Junior Brother Chu's extreme night dark mist? Why do I feel like I can't even open my eyes?" someone asked, their expression changing drastically. "My divine sense can't detect any movement inside that light," someone exclaimed in shock. The extreme night dark mist was the ultimate technique of the 8th campus. Moreover, because the tranquil heart saint had succeeded his Tao through formations, this ultimate technique naturally made use of formations as well. However, one didn't need to use formation eyes for this formation. Instead, they would act as the formation eye themselves. The integration of humans and formations was incredibly mighty. This wasn't something that cultivators at the same cultivation level could defeat. So, why had it been ineffective? Biyao charged forward, launching a wild and ferocious punch. This was slightly risky. Unless one possessed a physique as freakish as Ling Han's, one generally wouldn't be willing to draw too close to their opponents. This was because doing so would increase their own chance of being struck as well. Moreover, this would be especially dangerous if their opponent possessed a god tool. If they were struck by a god tool, allowing its murderous aura to enter their body, they would definitely suffer severe damage. However, the situation right now was different. That senior disciple was blinded by the dazzling radiance of the sun physique, and all that he could see was a blurry sheet of white. His divine sense had also been disturbed. In other words, he was as good as blind. It was because of this that Biyao dared to charge forward. The senior disciple was astonished. However, his battle instincts caused him to immediately leap backward in an attempt to escape the area that was affected by Biyao's sunlight. This was a very sound response. However, Biyao continued to advance as the other retreated, maintaining the short distance between them. One of them was retreating, while one of them was advancing. However, both were incredibly quick. The senior disciple became more and more shocked. Regardless of how he retreated, his surroundings would always be flooded with a blinding light. He couldn't see anything. This caused terror to rise in his mind. This won't last forever, right? Boom! The rising panic in his mind naturally caused him to make a slip-up. His retreat suddenly became slower, and Biyao's fist immediately arrived before his body. Pa! He was instantly sent flying. However, at the same time, he also exited the area that was enveloped by the blinding light. He crashed into the ground with a loud thud. There was a slightly salty taste in his mouth, and opening it, he immediately spat out 3 broken and bloodied teeth. Biyao retracted his sun physique, a satisfied smile on his face. He hadn't activated the power of his bloodline. Instead, he had only activated his newly obtained physique. Even so, he had managed to defeat a fellow king tier at the same cultivation level with ease. The Sun Stone was a precious stone from the celestial realm, and it was a stone that had nurtured and given birth to the 9 heavens flame, an ancestral flame. Thus, even if Biyao had only received a tiny fraction of benefits from it, this was still incredibly freakish when viewed in the context of the immortal realm. The other senior disciples were all stunned. Meanwhile, the young king tiers who still had yet to crawl through the dog flap stood up, complicated expressions on their faces as they gazed at Ling Han, Empress Wenxin, and Biyao. These were people who dared to resist and fight back. Although they were destined to lose, just their willpower alone was already worthy of their respect and admiration. Humph. Sure enough, you people are troublemakers, Gowning said with a baleful expression. You might be strong, but this is completely useless. In fact, it will only cause you to suffer more. Biyao wagged his finger in disagreement, saying, Is there anyone else? For those at the same cultivation level, I'll fight against however many of you step forward. In fact, I'll even fight against those at the medium extreme or high extreme. Right now, he possessed 2 different physiques, both of them extremely powerful. This caused his confidence to rise significantly. So intimidating was his domineering aura that none of the senior disciples dared to step forward and accept his challenge. Humph. You're a measly cultivator at the heavenly body tier. I can suppress you with a single finger. Gowning looked at him in disdain, saying, Don't forget, this isn't a sparring session. Rather, we're here to give you a welcome ceremony. Since you're resisting, we'll beat you down first. He raised a hand and grabbed at Biyao. As his hand reached forward, it transformed into a dry and shrunken claw. It was unclear what species this claw was from, but it reflected an icy cold and metallic sheen. It was as if this claw were forged from godly metal. It was extremely terrifying. Even more terrifying than this was his eternal river tier aura. He didn't need to fully unleash it, and just a wisp of its might would be powerful enough to suppress all of the beings present. Biyao wouldn't be able to resist this might even if he were 10,000 times more powerful. Empress Wenxin wanted to help, yet Ling Han raised his left arm to prevent her from interfering. He then extended his right arm, grabbing at that powerful claw. Laughable. Yi Gaoning said with a cold sneer. He was at the Eternal River tier. He had only advanced to the Eternal River tier 700,000 years ago, and right now, he was only at the late stage of the low extreme. However, those at the peak stage of the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier would only possess power that was on par with the early stage of the low extreme of the Eternal River tier. Moreover, was he not a prodigy? He would have an advantage of 2 stars, and he was more so a 5-star genius himself. Thus, with these combined, he would possess a crushing advantage of a whopping 7 stars. If he still couldn't defeat Ling Han, then he might as well kill himself. Ling Han casually waved his hand, and Yi Gaoning's claw immediately eroded at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. His claw was like sand that was flying away with the wind. Before his claw could even reach Ling Han, it had already vanished into nothingness. The Tide of the Ages. Ling Han had obtained the complete cultivation technique, Song of the Ages, from Hu Yu. This wasn't like the cultivation technique that he had extracted from Ding Zizhen's bloodline memory. Those in the Ding clan would all receive the inheritance, the Tide of the Ages, in their bloodline. However, some would be powerful, while others would be weak. This was completely dependent on their bloodline. Thus, Ling Han's grasp of the Tide of the Ages would be affected by the limit of Ding Zizhen's bloodline. Regardless of how powerful he became, his grasp of this technique wouldn't be able to surpass Ding Zizhen's. At the very least, he would need to advance to the Severing Mundane tier before he could investigate the power of time. However, Ling Han had cultivated in seclusion for 10 years after obtaining Song of the Ages. As such, how could his grasp of this technique not have improved? What? Everyone was stunned upon seeing this. In fact, even Yi Gaoning was astonished. How is this possible? This didn't make sense. As a king tier at the late stage of the low extreme of the Eternal River tier, shouldn't he have possessed a crushing advantage over someone at the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier? Meanwhile, the 7 king tiers who had yet to crawl through the dog flap all exclaimed in emotion. No wonder Ling Han was able to rank second among all of the new disciples. This was true strength. In fact, they even started to doubt whether Gu Daoyi would be powerful enough to achieve such a feat were he to be in Ling Han's position. Ling Han retracted his hand, and calmly said, "My disciple doesn't need your guidance. If he needs any guidance, I'll naturally provide it to him." Yi Gaoning's expression was slightly adrift. He was pondering whether he should battle against Ling Han. However, would he still have the face to show himself in the future if he retreated from a new disciple? Taking new disciples down a notch was tradition. If he failed to complete this task, it was very likely that the supremely powerful king tiers of the academy wouldn't let him off lightly. He couldn't help but curse in his mind. Why had he come across such a freak? Among the 9 saints, the Tranquil Heart Saint wasn't famous for his raw battle prowess. Instead, he was famous for his skill in the field of formations. In past years, no Supreme King tier had become a disciple of the 8th campus. It was also because of this that he was extremely relaxed and wanton. However, who knew that he would be so unfortunate? Such was his luck that he had come across this terrifying Supreme King tier. Motherfucker. Is there something wrong with your brain? Why did you come to the 8th campus? You're screwing me over, do you know that? Yi Gaoning didn't dare to underestimate Ling Han. "Junior brother, what's your name?" he asked in a solemn voice. Ling Han replied calmly. "Shall we spar?" Yi Gaoning didn't dare to make any more bold claims. After all, he genuinely wasn't confident of winning against Ling Han. The power of his opponent was beyond his expectations. If he knew that Ling Han had been called up second by the saints, perhaps he would feel slightly more at ease. Chapter 1469 Unable to achieve victory. Spar? Ling Han couldn't help but chuckle. He shook his head, and said, "If it's genuine sparring, I welcome it at any time. However, it's a shame that you people aren't here to simply spar." It's clear that you're trying to exert dominance and take us down a notch. Let us battle. Enough with the nonsense. If you're unable to achieve victory against me, then please go and obediently crawl through that dog flap as well. Anger involuntarily flared across Yi Gaoning's face. Ling Han wanted him to crawl through the dog flap. He was an Eternal River tier elite. Even on Wood Figure Planet, where there were 10 saints, Eternal River tier cultivators could still be regarded as elites. These were powerful cultivators who commanded respect and reverence from everyone. Yet, Ling Han actually wanted an Eternal River tier elite to crawl through a dog flap? Was he trying to cause an uprising? I've seen many audacious people. However, Yi Gaoning shook his head, and continued, Junior brother Ling, your talent is indeed incredible. However, you have to understand that this is the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. Here, there is no shortage of prodigies. Ling Han laughed loudly, appearing as wanton as could be. That's because you've never come across me before. He was radiating with pride as he said this, and his astonishing aura was so powerful that it could convince all those who heard his words. Yi Gaoning was also affected by his aura. He faltered momentarily before a dark expression spread across his face. Then let us battle. There was regret in his mind. Why had he accepted this task? If he had known that there would be such a powerful troublemaker, would he still have fought so hard for this task? What could he do now? Not only had he come across a troublemaker, but this troublemaker was even a profoundly powerful freak. Destruction of 1,000 Dao. He slapped his own body. Wang. Specks of incredibly bright light pulsated inside his body. This was a formation eye. The Tranquil Heart Saint had succeeded his Dao through formations, and he had more so achieved this by using his own body as a formation. Every single bone in his body was a formation eye, and his body itself was more so a large killing formation. Numerous golden sabers materialized around Yi Gaoning, all of them brimming with a murderous aura that soared into the skies. Upon seeing this, a speculation formed in Ling Han's mind. Back in the lower realm, Ma Duobao had been born as a killing formation. The first killing formation had been engraved inside his body. Moreover, the third killing formation had also been a person. Perhaps this wasn't the doing of the heavens, but instead a bloodline inheritance as well? For example, if Yi Gaoning was powerful enough, the formation patterns engraved on his bones could be passed down onto his descendants. Of course, this inheritance naturally wouldn't be a complete inheritance. However, just a portion of its power would be sufficiently powerful enough to be regarded as the first killing formation or third killing formation if it were placed in a small world. Ling Han already knew that bloodlines were created and a powerful ancestor fused their Dao into their body. It was because of this that their bloodline could be passed down through future generations. That being the case, why couldn't formations be passed down? Wang. Just as his thoughts were running wild, Yi Gaoning had already lashed out. Several hundred golden sabers shot toward Ling Han. Ling Han forcefully charged toward them, not trying to evade at all. Are you seeking death? Yi Gaoning couldn't help but sneer. He conceded that Ling Han's technique just then had indeed been astonishing. Ling Han had blocked his attack using a technique that even he couldn't understand. However, he had only launched a casual attack just then. Now, however, he was attacking with his full power. Yet, Ling Han was still charging over without a care in the world. Was he seeking death? I'll grant you your wish. Yi Gaoning circulated his formation and fused it together with his battle prowess. He then pushed his attack to the extreme as the sabers blasted toward Ling Han. He naturally wouldn't kill this new disciple. Taking them down a notch was just that, but if he killed a new disciple, he would definitely have to pay with his own life. No one would be exempt from this punishment. However, it was unavoidable that Ling Han would suffer shattered bones and other severe wounds. The golden sabers arrived before Ling Han. Ding, ding, ding. There was a series of crisp rings, and it was as if these were real god tools, not weapons that had been formed from origin power and spiritual qi. However, what did this matter? The golden sabers were all deflected aside as they struck Ling Han's body. It was as if he weren't being attacked by an Eternal River tier elite, but instead by some random weakling. How is this possible? Yi Gaoning was unable to accept this. What kind of fucking defensive armor are you wearing? How is it so freakish? It can easily withstand my full power attack. However, he could clearly see that there was no glowing divine pattern on Ling Han's body. If he were using a god tool, there was no way that it could be so subtle. Perhaps, it's his physique? Gasp. Indeed, Ling Han's physique had already surpassed the toughness of level 13 godly metal. However, just this alone still wouldn't be enough to withstand the attack of a king tier at the low extreme of the Eternal River tier. More importantly, Ling Han had actively channeled the indestructible Heaven's Scroll. This had allowed his defenses to reach an astonishing level for a short period of time. In fact, he could have even withstood the attack of a saint. That being the case, how could Yi Gaoning's attack have wounded him? After launching his most powerful attack, his defenses were naturally at their most fragile state. Pung! Ling Han launched a punch that smashed into Yi Gaoning's face. Yi Gaoning was instantly sent flying. He crashed into a gate before bouncing back off, his arms and legs spread wide open as he collapsed onto the ground. Everyone grimaced upon seeing this. Were these new disciples trying to defy the heavens? Was Yi Gaoning powerful? He was undoubtedly powerful. However, Ling Han had defeated him in a single strike. In fact, if Yi Gaoning had been prepared, he could have engaged in a long skirmish with Ling Han. That way, even if Ling Han had eventually won, it would have taken him at least several hundred, several thousand, or even tens of thousands of exchanges. However, how could Yi Gaoning have known that Ling Han possessed such a freakish physique? After a single violent exchange, he was instantly sent sprawling. Brilliant! The 7 new disciples couldn't help but exclaim in delight. They naturally didn't want to crawl through the dog flap. They were king tiers, so how could they be willing to suffer such humiliation? Thus, they were all exhilarated upon seeing Ling Han resist and fight back, even gaining an upper hand. After witnessing this, they could accept it even if a more powerful senior disciple eventually appeared and forced them to crawl through the dog flap. They had fought back. And they had even slapped the face of a senior disciple. Yi Gaoning slowly picked himself up. In the instant that Ling Han had struck him, he had used his origin power to guard his own face. Thus, even though he had been sent flying, he hadn't suffered any severe wounds. After all, he was an elite at the late stage of the low extreme of the Eternal River tier. Moreover, he was also a king tier. His face was beet red as he glowered at Ling Han. He had actually lost to a new disciple. There were more so flames of rage and menace flickering in his eyes. He had been slapped before so many people. How utterly humiliating. If he didn't exact revenge, how could he face anyone in the future? Just you wait. However, Yi Gaoning didn't choose to continue his battle with Ling Han. He was afraid that he would be humiliated even further. He was going to seek help from more powerful seniors and ask them to suppress Ling Han. Rules were rules. To say nothing of Ling Han, even the current saints had been forced to crawl through these dog flaps when they had first arrived at the academy. Ling Han would be dreaming if he wanted to become the first exception. Doing so would be opposing the entire Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. He was destined to fail. Humph. Trying to leave? Ling Han said with a cold chuckle. What a joke, you tried to force me into crawling through this dog flap even though I didn't provoke you in any way. Yet, after being defeated by me, you're trying to pat yourself off and leave? Do you think it's that easy? Perhaps you want me to stay? Yi Gaoning asked. He couldn't help but chuckle. I don't want you to stay, I'll force you to stay. Killing intent radiated from Ling Han's body. I already said it just then. If you lose to me, then please go and obediently crawl through that dog flap. In your dreams. Yi Gaoning said with a cold chuckle. Looking back at history, there had never been a shortage of troublemakers. Among them, there had also been some supremely talented individuals. However, in the end, which of them hadn't been suppressed by a more powerful senior? There was no helping this. The gulf between their cultivation levels was far too large, so how could they withstand the might of their seniors? If a king tier at the low extreme of the Eternal River tier couldn't suppress Ling Han, then what about a king tier at the medium extreme? Or the high extreme? Or perhaps even the consummate level? Chapter 1470 Great Misfortune. Yi Gaoning decided to ignore Ling Han. He didn't have any confidence in going against him, so it was definitely best to seek out some reinforcements. He turned around to leave. However, just as he raised his foot, he felt a terrifying killing intent lock onto him. This killing intent would mercilessly slash over if he dared to take a step, killing and leaving him with no proper burial. This was only a feeling. However, elites like him held immense trust in their senses and intuition. If he took a step, he would trigger a wild and unrelenting barrage of attacks from Ling Han. However, Yi Gaoning found this a little strange. This was because there was something slightly different about this killing intent. He turned around extremely slowly, afraid that any quick movements would cause his opponent to mercilessly attack. When he finally managed to fully turn around, Yi Gaoning was astonished to discover that the killing intent that had locked onto him wasn't from Ling Han. Rather, it was from the woman who had a white veil covering her face. Her figure was stunning, and she radiated with an aura of nobility and dominance. It was as if she were an empress. Yi Gaoning was completely stunned. This killing intent was terrifying, so much so that even he was feeling apprehensive. From this, it could be seen that this woman definitely possessed a devastating power. However, this woman was only at the heavenly body tier. This was another supreme king tier at the peak stage of the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier. Otherwise, there was no way she could have exuded such an overwhelming and terrifying aura. Yi Gaoning was about to go crazy. This was the fucking 8th campus, where everyone specialized in practicing formations. So, why had two supreme king tiers decided to come here? There was a menacing glint in Empress Wenxin's eyes. This person actually wanted her and Ling Han to crawl through the dog flap. With her proud and haughty personality, how could she not be enraged? I'm going to dice you into 10,000 pieces and feed you to the wild dogs, the Empress said in rage. However, her charm was far too great. Even though she had uttered such a menacing threat, not a single person felt hostility toward her. Instead, they felt that she was extremely domineering. Young lady, I don't eat meat, the large black dog said as he suddenly appeared from out of nowhere. Don't slander Grandpa Dog. Ling Han chuckled upon hearing this. This depraved dog didn't eat meat? Who the fuck would believe this? If he came across a supremely valuable medicine, perhaps he would be a vegetarian for that short period of time. However, during other times, he would definitely be a dog who didn't care what he ingested, whether it was meat or otherwise. Regarding the large black dog mysteriously appearing and disappearing, Ling Han didn't find this especially strange. Either crawl through the dog flap or get pummeled by me. It's your choice. Ling Han rolled up his sleeves, and it was as if he were going to team up with Empress Wenxin to punish Yi Gaoning. Dog. Dog flap, the large black dog asked as he jumped over. Upon seeing the dog flap beside the gate, he couldn't help but feel enraged, shouting, "You brats actually dare to insult me? Grandpa Dog is going to bite you people to death." He dashed over and ferociously bit at Yi Gaoning's bottom. The pitiful Yi Gaoning didn't dare to move at all. Ling Han and Empress Wenxin had already locked onto his aura, so if he dared to move, he would definitely have to face devastating attacks from them. He didn't dare to take this risk. In his mind, there was nothing special about this large black dog. It was just slightly strange in that it was actually wearing a pair of iron underwear. This dog was nothing but a joke. Thus, he simply channeled his origin power, forming a protective barrier around his body. Ling Han sighed upon seeing this. Although the large black dog was extremely depraved, those who dared to underestimate him would all face misfortune, great misfortune. Wang. The large black dog mysteriously broke through Yi Gaoning's protective barrier. With a snarl, he then viciously bit down on Yi Gaoning's bottom. Ah! Yi Gaoning's entire body arched back as severe pain shot through his body. He had no time to worry about his movements being too large and thereby triggering attacks from Ling Han and Empress Wenxin either. Through howls of agony, he hurriedly moved his hands down to protect his bottom. You actually dared to insult me? See how I bite your bottom into 3 cheeks. The large black dog continued to ferociously bite at Yi Gaoning's bottom. There were loud tearing sounds, and blood started to flow from his mouth. Let go. Hurry up and let go. Yi Gaoning shouted through gritted teeth. There were no bones in one's bottom, so this brutal bite truly sent waves of heart-wrenching pain through his body. Yi Gaoning genuinely couldn't endure this any longer, so he stood up and started to run, hoping to shake the large black dog off. However, the large black dog was extremely tenacious when it came to things like this. He wouldn't let go no matter what, and it was as if he were determined to bite a piece of Yi Gaoning's flesh off. Moreover, he continued to add insult to the injury, saying, "Ugly man, why is your bottom so stinky? How many days haven't you bathed for? Pay, pay, pay. It's Grandpa Dog's great misfortune to have come across a sh*tty person such as you." Yi Gaoning almost vomited blood upon hearing this. It was him who was suffering great misfortune, okay? His bottom was actually being bitten by a rabid dog. Everyone was stunned speechless by this incredibly strange sight. An Eternal River Tier elite was actually having his bottom bitten by a large black dog? And this large black dog was actually wearing a pair of iron underwear? This sight was as strange as could be. C*NT dog, I'm going to kill you. Yi Gaoning couldn't shake the large black dog off, so he had no choice but to attack. His bones started to glow. In fact, there were formation patterns inscribed on his bones, meaning that each of his bones was a formation eye in itself. Moreover, the higher his cultivation level, the higher the level of formation patterns that he could inscribe on his bones. The higher the level of these formation patterns, the more mighty they would naturally be. Countless golden sabers slashed toward the large black dog, yearning to dice him into mincemeat. However, the large black dog's physique was surprisingly powerful, with the golden sabers unable to hurt him a single bit. In fact, they couldn't even cut off a single strand of his hair. The large black dog was extremely smug as he continued to bite onto Yi Gaoning's bottom. Surprisingly, however, he still had the ability to speak, saying, "Trying to hurt your grandpa dog? You're far too weak. Foolish human, obediently become my stead." Yi Gaoning was beside himself with rage. He could accept defeat, but asking him to become the stead of this large black dog? If he truly became one, he would genuinely have no more face in the future. "Fuck this, I'm going to kill you," he roared. He angrily gritted his teeth, causing a mouthful of blood to shoot out from his mouth. At the same time, 30% of his hair instantly turned grayish-white. However, his aura rose explosively, reaching the medium extreme of the Eternal River Tier. Pung! He launched a palm, striking at the large black dog's body. The might of this strike was far too great, and the large black dog was instantly sent flying. However, there was a loud tearing sound as a large chunk of Yi Gaoning's bottom was brutally torn off. There was a massive hole in his pants, and his white bottom was clear for the world to see. However, there was a large chunk of it missing. Blood flowed freely, dyeing his pants a crimson red. Because there was a large chunk of flesh missing from his left bum cheek, it now looked like it was 2 cheeks. Add to that his right bum cheek, and sure enough, he now had 3 bum cheeks just as the large black dog had promised. Ah! However, it was the large black dog who started unleash deafening screams of agony. Murder! Murder! The pain is killing Grandpa Dog. Hurry, someone come and help me. There's a madman indiscriminately beating people. This Everyone grimaced upon seeing this. In fact, even Ling Han started to feel some slight sympathy for Yi Gaoning. There wasn't a single wound on the large black dog's body, while Yi Gaoning had suffered a devastating wound to his bottom. Was it not clear who had suffered more? However, this despicable dog was actually screaming before Yi Gaoning even opened his mouth. Moreover, his screams were deafening and earth-shattering. If they hadn't witnessed the events with their very own eyes, they would have definitely thought that Yi Gaoning had done something unspeakable to the despicable large black dog. This caused Yi Gaoning to forget his pain. He was dazed as he stared at the large black dog, and he felt that of the countless shameless people that he had come across in his lifetime, none of them could even come close to comparing to this large black dog. They were like his grandsons when it came to shamelessness. Some cleverer senior disciple had already turned around to flee. Since Yi Gaoning wasn't able to break free, it was probably best that he run away to call for reinforcements. There were freakish talents among the new disciples, and there was also a despicable yet powerful large black dog. However, before he could even leave, he saw a large hand descending from the sky, forcefully suppressing him. Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, "I can allow you to leave, but through this door please." He pointed at the dog flap. Since this was how they had treated him, he was simply returning the favor now. Chapter 1471 Petrified. No. The senior disciples all tilted their heads in defiance. How could they do this? They were the senior disciples. Not only had they failed to uphold the tradition, but they were even being bullied by their junior disciples now. How could they accept this? "I'm not asking for your opinions," Ling Han said as he lashed out. "Pa, pa, pa." He mercilessly broke their legs before forcing them to crawl through the dog flap. When the first person crawled through, there was initially silence from behind the gates. However, shouts of delight quickly broke out. "Senior Brother Ling! Senior Brother Ling! Senior Brother Ling!" Everyone was shouting Ling Han's name, excitement and exhilaration in their voices. Which of them wasn't a king tier? Had they ever suffered such humiliation before? However, they were weaker than the senior disciples, so what could they do? Just a single Eternal River tier elite was enough to suppress them all. Moreover, their backgrounds would be of no help either. After all, the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy had 10 saints. However, in the blink of an eye, those haughty senior disciples were given a taste of their own medicine. They were forced to get down on all fours and crawl through the dog flap just like they had. This naturally tugged at their emotions and caused them to become incredibly excited and worked up. At this moment, they were willing to wade through fire and water for Ling Han. Meanwhile, the senior disciples who were crawling through the dog flap were all beet red in the face. They were feeling incredibly stifled. However, who told them to provoke the new disciples first? They naturally had to face the consequences of their own inflammatory actions. "It's your turn," Ling Han said as he looked at Yi Gaoning. Yi Gaoning gritted his teeth. He definitely couldn't kneel. It didn't matter as much for the other senior disciples, as they were only at the heavenly body tier. Thus, it wasn't overly humiliating that they had lost against someone at the same cultivation level. However, he was different. He was an Eternal River tier elite, and he represented the face of the older disciples. If he crawled through the dog flap, that would be equivalent to all of the senior disciples being slapped across the face. He definitely couldn't shoulder such a responsibility. If he kneeled, he would become the eternal shame of the senior disciples. No. Yi Gaoning was burning with fighting spirit. In order to break free from the large black dog just then, he had combusted his life force. Thus, he was brimming with energy right now, searing hot energy. "You actually forced me to this extent. I'm going to make you pay," he roared. Combusting his life force meant that his cultivation wouldn't see any improvements for the next several million years, unless he obtained some saint-level natural treasures. He had genuinely suffered a massive loss. He aggressively lashed out, aiming to suppress both Ling Han and Empress Wenxin. At the very least, he had to win back some face. "Wife, let's beat him together," Ling Han said with a smile. "Sure," the Empress replied with a gentle nod. Generally speaking, Supreme King tiers like them would find it beneath themselves to team up with others and gang up on someone. However, who told Yigaoning to be at the Eternal River tier? To say nothing of them two teaming up, it wouldn't raise an eyebrow even if 100 people teamed up. After all, could a team of 100 Heavenly Body tier elites erase the gulf in power between them and an Eternal River tier elite? No way. Ling Han unleashed heaven's might. It didn't matter that Yigaoning was at the Eternal River tier, with his power still being suppressed by 2 stars. After advancing to the pinnacle level of the Heavenly Body tier, Ling Han could now be considered as a pseudo-Eternal Rive tier elite. Thus, Yigaoning would naturally be affected by heaven's might. Meanwhile, Empress Wenxin swung a brick at Yigaoning. This was the absolute beginning stone, and it was a brick that could absorb all power as long as the said power wasn't at the Genesis tier. Quite simply, this was an invincible brick. Pa. The combined power of Ling Han and Empress Wenxin was incredible. What did it matter that Yigaoning had combusted his life force and advanced to the medium extreme of the Eternal River tier for the time being? His power had been suppressed by 2 stars, and his attacks were more so dissolved by the tide of the ages. For those attacks that Ling Han and Empress Wenxin couldn't block, wasn't there still the absolute beginning stone? In terms of cultivation, Yigaoning was a king tier who possessed a tremendous advantage over his opponents. However, he was actually struggling to contain 2 Heavenly Body tier cultivators. In fact, he was actually being suppressed by them instead. The surrounding disciples could barely believe their eyes. It was as if they were in a dream. These new disciples weren't just impressive. Rather, they were boundlessly impressive. Ling Han and Empress Wenxin were flawless in their cooperation. They unleashed all kinds of powerful techniques, quickly translating their advantage into victory. They had successfully defeated and captured Yigaoning. "Are you sure you don't want to crawl through the dog flap?" Ling Han asked. Yigaoning kept his mouth tightly shut. He definitely wouldn't bow his head. At this moment, he wasn't representing just himself. "Little Black, come," Ling Han said with a wave of his hand. "Who's calling Grandpa Dog?" the large black dog asked as he appeared from out of nowhere again. He slowly ran over, and upon discovering that it was Ling Han, he stood up on his hind legs like a human. He clasped his front paws behind his back and said, "Brat, how audacious of you. You actually dared to call Grandpa Dog Little Black? Then Big Black?" Ling Han asked with a smile. "It's Grandpa Black," the large black dog corrected. He then waved his paw and said, "Brat, why did you call Grandpa Dog? Think of a way to force him through the dog FL." The large black dog cut Ling Han off and shouted in displeasure, "Dog your mom. That's a rat hole." Ling Han was unfazed, and he continued, "Think of a way to make him crawl through." The large black dog was full of evil tricks, and he greatly enjoyed screwing other people over. There was a glimmer in his eyes, and he said, "Grandpa Dog is great at these things." Judging by his excited expression, Ling Han's request had definitely piqued his interest. In fact, even his tongue was hanging out of his mouth, with drool freely flowing down. A cold chill shot down Yigaoning's spine. He genuinely wasn't afraid of Ling Han. After all, Ling Han wouldn't dare to kill him, was certain of this. Moreover, in just a while, many more senior disciples would naturally arrive to check on the situation. At that time, his crisis would have been eliminated. However, this large black dog was far too depraved. Heavens knew what kind of debauched method he would use. Just thinking about this made him tremble uncontrollably. An Eternal River tier elite was trembling after hearing his words. The large black dog could feel very proud of this. "Huh? Why are you trembling? Are you afraid of Grandpa Dog? You truly hurt Grandpa Dog's heart. Grandpa Dog is so kind-hearted that I won't even kill an ant." If anyone calls Grandpa Dog a bad person, then there definitely exists no good person in the world. The large black dog spoke with great emotion. However, Ling Han uncovered him from the side, saying, "Of course you're not a bad person. After all, you're a dog. Woof. Believe me, I'll bite you to death as well," the large black dog threatened. Ling Han shrugged, and said, "Hurry up and give me an idea. Pay. If it weren't for you continually interrupting me, this brat would have been shaking in submission already." The large black dog's eyes darted around, and he said to Yi Gowning, "If you don't obey, Grandpa Dog will find a sow and then feed you some medicine. I'll have you mate with the sow right here in front of everyone." Pooh. Ling Han instantly coughed and spluttered. Sure enough, this large black dog was an incredibly depraved dog. He was far too malicious. He could even concoct such a debauched idea. Yi Gowning was drenched in cold sweat. If he genuinely mated with a sow, would he still have the face to remain in the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy? Whenever others saw him, they would warmly refer to him as the brave sow rider. "I've changed my mind," the large black dog suddenly said with a shake of his head. Yi Gowning breathed a sigh of relief as a feeling of exhaustion washed over him. However, the large black dog immediately said, "It's better if I find a boar. We can have it sodomize you." "No." Yi Gowning instantly shouted in alarm. He could barely fathom this scenario. Meanwhile, the surrounding disciples were also drenched in cold sweat. This was far too malicious. Mating with a sow was already humiliating enough. However, being sodomized by a boar? That was even worse. Despicable dog. This dog was genuinely despicable, all the way into his bones. I'll crawl through the dog flap." Yi Gowning's willpower finally crumbled. "What dog flap? You dare to insult Grandpa Dog?" The large black dog was enraged, and he lashed out with his paw, saying, "No, Grandpa Dog has changed his mind again. We'll have you mate with 100 sows first. We'll then have you sodomized by 100 boars. 100 times. Chapter 1472 Ancestor Wenxin. I'll crawl. Yi Gowning's willpower was completely broken. Mating with sows 100 times, and then being sodomized by boars 100 times. Could any human endure this? He was afraid that Ling Han wouldn't agree, so he immediately charged to the dog flap before lowering his head and starting to crawl through. It was as if he would fight with his life if Ling Han didn't allow him to crawl through. The surrounding disciples all widened their eyes in shock upon seeing this. Since when had crawling through a dog flap become so desirable? Ling Han couldn't help but glance at the large black dog, and say, "You're truly impressive. You actually managed to break the willpower of an Eternal River tier elite with words." "Of course. I'm Grandpa Dog," the large black dog said smugly. He was standing on his hind legs like a human, and he reached his front paw down in an attempt to scratch his bottom. However, his claws raked into his iron underwear instead, giving rise to an ear-piercing scraping sound. "Stop." There was a furious roar as several senior disciples dashed over. They had all become incredibly furious upon seeing Yi Gowning crawl through the dog flap. Him crawling through the dog flap had represented the loss of the senior disciple's face. However, Yi Gowning had been petrified by the large black dog's threat. Mating with sows 100 times, and then being sodomized by boars 100 times. 100 times. These were the two words ringing inside his mind. In fact, he hadn't noticed the arrival of the senior disciples at all. He was mumbling to himself, his face pale as he resolutely crawled through the dog flap. In his eyes, this wasn't a dog flap. Instead, this was a passageway to freedom, a passageway that allowed him to crawl out of hell. Ha! The large black dog was feeling extremely accomplished at this moment. Indeed, being able to petrify an Eternal River tier elite to such an extent was something to be proud of. However, this large black dog was far too uncouth, with his tactics more so incredibly debauched. It was very likely that no one felt any admiration for him. Instead, they were probably feeling disdain. Gowning, the senior disciples roared. Their voices were like booming thunder, and it was as if they wanted to shake Gowning to his senses. This was indeed effective, with Gowning being dazed by their roars. He then suddenly came to his senses, with his crawling action also faltering before stopping. There was a confused expression on his face. However, this expression quickly transformed into one of beet-red humiliation before again transforming into one of utter grief and desire for death. His name and reputation had been destroyed. More importantly, he was coincidentally halfway through the dog flap. The top half of his body was inside, while the bottom half of his body was still outside. Moreover, his bottom was raised into the air. This was a comical sight. Being as depraved as he was, the large black dog retrieved a staff from his spatial spirit tool before stabbing it at Gowning. Ah! Gowning howled in agony. This was perhaps his most agonized wail since birth. Like a frightened rabbit, he immediately shot through the dog flap, emerging from the other end. Meanwhile, everyone could clearly see the cloud of blood spraying from his bottom. This. As a mighty Eternal River tier elite, he had actually had his S penetrated before everyone. Ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha. The large black dog was rolling on the ground and laughing. His legs were kicking in the air, and his iron underwear continued to collide with the ground, giving rise to a loud clanging sound. Everyone shook their heads upon seeing this. At this moment, Gowning's face and reputation had truly been ruined. He was destined to become the butt of jokes now. Whenever people talked about him, they would definitely have to mention how he had suffered a penetrated S when crawling through a dog flap on this day. Moreover, he had been kneeling on the ground with his bottom raised in preparation. Gowning sprinted away in humiliation, not having the face to glance back. As he sprinted away, all he left behind were 2 trails of glistening tears. Damn it! The senior disciples were burning with rage as they walked over. Their rage was almost corporeal, and the flames of fury that burst from their eyes measured at least 1 foot long. Eternal River tier, Eternal River tier, Eternal River tier. The 6 senior disciples were all at the Eternal River tier. These were the reinforcements that some of the senior disciples had called after crawling through the dog flap. Fortunately, these 6 people were only at the low extreme of the Eternal River tier. However, there were 6 of them. Was this not enough to suppress a few heavenly body tier cultivators? Initially, they had been doubtful that someone as powerful as Gowning would fail to suppress a few junior disciples at the heavenly body tier. However, upon arriving, they had personally witnessed Gowning being forced to crawl through the dog flap. In any case, there were only 3 troublemakers. Moreover, one of them was only at the low extreme of the heavenly body tier. Thus, this person could naturally be ignored. In their eyes, such a cultivator couldn't even be considered as an elite. After all, they could defeat such a cultivator with a single glare. That being the case, the only troublemakers remaining would be that man and woman. Could it be that they possess some powerful saint tool? Otherwise, how could they have withstood the power of an Eternal River tier elite? However, there were 6 of them right now. So what did it matter even if these 2 troublemakers possessed a powerful saint tool? After all, they had an overwhelming advantage in numbers. A senior disciple stepped forward and said, "Humph. The Academy has its own regulations, yet you're not abiding by those regulations. You're asking for a beating." He looked around 30 or so, with silver hair and a single horn on his forehead. There was a haughty expression on his face. His original form was that of a demonic beast. However, because his bloodline was extremely noble, he was naturally haughty and conceited. "Kneel," Empress Wenxin said in an even haughtier and more domineering manner. However, the Empress was far too beautiful, so even her domineering demeanor was charming and attractive. one wouldn't be able to feel any hostility toward her. Instead, they would feel that she had a strong personality, with her smile and laugh incredibly beautiful. In fact, even her expression of anger was breathtakingly beautiful. The silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple couldn't help but fall victim to the Empress' captivating charm. There was a look of intoxication on his face. However, he immediately shook his head to clear his mind, saying, "You actually want me to kneel? Preposterous. Are the new disciples genuinely trying to defy the heavens?" However, Empress Wenxin couldn't even be bothered replying. She directly lashed out. Wang. Four heavenly bodies materialized behind her, each of them radiating with a menacing might. This was the might of a supreme king tier. The silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple sneered coldly. "You're indeed stunningly beautiful, but you're only at the heavenly body tier. What does it matter even if you've reached the pinnacle level? I can suppress you with a single hand." With this in mind, the senior disciple lashed out with a single hand. Wang. A silver river appeared in the air. It was brilliant and dazzling, and there were countless heavenly bodies pulsating within it. It was easy to see that Eternal River tier elites possessed a crushing advantage over heavenly body tier cultivators. Empress Wenxin naturally wouldn't face his attack head-on. Although her battle prowess was on par with the low extreme of the Eternal River tier, her power was still a massive weakness. Xiao. She launched a strike using her brick. The punch of the silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple arrived, yet its power was surprisingly absorbed by the brick. Taking advantage of the momentum, the Empress then flicked the brick at the senior disciple. Pa! The brick slammed into his face, sending him flying backward. The 5 newly arrived senior disciples were all stunned. The battle prowess of Empress Wenxin was clearly within expectations and far weaker than that of the silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple, so why had he been sent flying after just a single exchange? What precious treasure was that? It was far too powerful, was it not? After flying for 30 or so meters, the silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple straightened his body and stabilized his movements. He was an Eternal River tier elite, after all, and he had only been taken by surprise. It wasn't as if he were genuinely weaker than the Empress. He was absolutely furious at this moment. His silver hair stood on ends, and his killing intent was almost tangible as it proliferated into the surroundings. So what if the Empress charming and beautiful? He couldn't swallow this humiliation. Pooh! However, when the other disciples saw his face, they couldn't help but splutter and laugh out loud. Ancestor Wenxin. Achievements that stun for all eternity. Suppressing the chaos. Remembered forever, someone read. These were the words that were printed on the face of the silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple. However, they were naturally reversed. What was the absolute beginning stone? Apart from absorbing attacks, its only other specialty was being incredibly hard. It had no other use. Thus, people used these stones as tablets to record the mighty achievements of their clan or ancestor. Ha ha ha. The surrounding disciples couldn't help but burst into laughter. The words, Ancestor Wenxin, were far too large and clear. Chapter 1473 Charm of the Empress. Perhaps the silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple would gain a new nickname from today onward, Ancestor Wenxin. However, he still hadn't realized it himself. Anyhow, he was beside himself with rage, and the bones inside his body all started to glow with a silver radiance. He was going to go all out and suppress this audacious woman. Seeing that you're a woman, I had already given you some slack. Yet, you still dared to provoke me. Empress Wenxin rose 9 meters into the air before pointing down at the senior disciple. Her expression was one of complete and utter contempt. It was as if she were saying, I disdain you. The spectating disciples were all enchanted by her prowess. The more proud and haughty she acted, the more they became attracted to her. In fact, they felt an urge to throw themselves at her feet and do anything that she pleased. Detestable. The silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple lashed out, a beam of light shooting forth from his fingers. This beam of light then transformed into a whip that fused together with the power of his body as well as the might of his formations. It was overwhelmingly powerful. This whip could kill even elites at the early stage of the low extreme of the Eternal River tier. However, the Empress was unafraid, and she charged forward with her brick. Pang, pang, pang. The two of them became locked in an intense battle. However, the silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple was prepared this time, and thus he naturally wouldn't be sent flying so easily again. Meanwhile, Empress Wenxin possessed the absolute beginning stone, and was more so already at the peak stage of the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier. Thus, she wasn't afraid of the silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple either. It wasn't long before the battle reached its apex, with both of them bleeding and wounded. Ling Han didn't interfere. Empress Wenxin was also a supreme king tier, and she certainly hadn't become the Empress of the Chaotic Star's majestic empire with her appearance alone. Instead, she had become the Empress through her strength and abilities. If she wanted to grow more powerful in the future, she naturally couldn't rely on cultivation alone. Battling against fellow prodigies was also an integral necessity. Which elite hadn't reached their position through intense competition and battles? Thus, unless she was facing life-threatening danger, Ling Han definitely wouldn't interfere in her battles. Pa! Empress Wenxin exchanged a powerful attack with the silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple, causing both of them to slide 300 or so meters back. The left sleeve of the senior disciple was torn apart, revealing his thick and toned arm. Meanwhile, the white face veil of Empress Wenxin was also ripped into shreds, revealing her true appearance. The Empress' clothes weren't any ordinary clothes, with all of them being weaved from the feathers or fur of high-level demonic beasts. Thus, they could remain undamaged even after taking extremely powerful hits. However, the veil covering her face was far weaker than her clothes. Although there was still an air of primal chaos shrouding her face, how could this obstruct the vision of Heavenly Body tier and Eternal River tier cultivators? The surroundings suddenly fell silent. How could there exist such a perfect and beautiful woman? She wasn't just beautiful, but she was flawlessly beautiful. There wasn't a single flaw with her appearance. She was a stunning woman who could intoxicate people with her figure and demeanor alone. Now that her appearance had been revealed, who could still resist her tremendous charm? Some of the disciples wore drunken expressions, while others were already starting to drool. Meanwhile, there were also some who were muttering in intoxication. The beauty of the Empress was the embodiment of beauty in their imagination. Indeed, she was like a realization of their imaginations. Just a second ago, the silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple had been burning with rage. Now, however, his rage was subsiding with every passing second. Who could bear attacking such a beautiful and flawless woman? However, would Empress Wenxin pay any heed to this? She was incredibly proud, so wasn't it only natural that all of the beings in the world revered and bowed down to her? She mercilessly charged forward, swinging the brick as she did so. Her battle prowess hadn't dipped a single bit. Meanwhile, the silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple was extremely flustered, his arms and legs a swinging mess as he tried to parry. That being the case, how could he still battle? He was defeated by Empress Wenxin after just a few more exchanges. It wasn't because he was weaker than her, but rather because he no longer had the desire to battle against her. He simply wanted to appreciate her beauty. However, he paid a heavy price for this sudden change in attitude. The right side of his face was smacked by the brick again. The words, "name passed down for all eternity. Spread the might of Migh clan," were especially clear. The Empress descended to the ground, her domineering aura instantly disappearing as she walked back to Ling Han. She gently leaned against him. The disciples instantly turned around to glare at Ling Han, jealousy burning in their eyes. To say nothing of the senior disciples, even the new disciples were gritting their teeth in jealousy. It was as if they wanted to bite Ling Han to death. The charm of the Empress was far too great. Woof! Little Han, you're about to receive punishment from the heavens. I reckon it's better if this beautiful maiden became my maid. The large black dog was the first to betray Ling Han, immediately leaping over to bite at his bottom. Ling Han knew that this despicable dog was full of evil tricks, so how could he have not been alert? He immediately clenched his fists and threw a punch. Pung! His fist smashed into the large black dog's face. This was a punch that possessed the power of heaven's might and divine lightning, so the large black dog's body became numb from the lightning even though he possessed an astonishing physique. Ow! You black-hearted brat! You were actually guarding against Grandpa Dog? How petty of you! Where's the most fundamental trust between people? The large black dog instantly threw a barrage of accusations at Ling Han. It had clearly been him who had attacked first, yet he was instead blaming Ling Han for guarding against him. There's no fundamental trust between humans and dogs, Ling Han said with a chuckle. He swept his gaze around, only to discover that everyone looked as if they wanted to eat him alive. Sure enough, he had become public enemy number one after the sudden reveal of Empress Wenxin's true appearance. Since this was the case, he would battle. Ling Han laughed heartily, and said, "Who else wants me to crawl through this dog flap?" Humph. Traditions can't be disregarded. You must bow your head today, a senior disciple who had a pair of wings on his back stepped forward and said. However, both of his wings were composed of fish scales, with their perimeters razor-sharp and radiating a cold and godly metal-like sheen. Attack together. Take him down. This senior disciple didn't dare to act too arrogantly. Empress Wenxin had already used her strength to prove the power of these new disciples. He didn't want to go down the same path as Yi Gowning or the silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple. The 6 Eternal River tier elites attacked together, all of them charging toward Ling Han. You want to hurt my husband? The Empress asked with a proud humph. There was a supreme might in her beautiful eyes as she pointed forward with the absolute beginning stone. Her aura was incredibly domineering. Come, let's continue to battle together. Ling Han was brimming with pride and confidence. He wouldn't crawl through this dog flap even if he had to die. He would give his all in this battle, and he would resist until the last drop of his blood. He charged forward with Empress Wenxin, meeting the attacks of the 6 Eternal River tier elites. Just then, he and Empress Wenxin had been able to pummel Yi Gowning. However, 6 Eternal River tier elites were far too powerful a formation. Moreover, each of their attacks was capable of shattering heaven and earth. If this weren't the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy, where the saints had set up defensive formations everywhere, how could this small piece of land withstand their intense battle? It would have been obliterated long ago. Ling Han unleashed heaven's might, suppressing the power of the 6 elites by 2 stars. The 6 Eternal River tier elites were astonished. This technique was far too frightening. Regardless of who Ling Han came across, he could suppress their power by 2 stars. In essence, Ling Han would gain an advantage of 2 stars. During battles between king tiers, such a technique was simply heaven-defying. The battle was intense and brutal. Regardless of whether it was Ling Han, Empress Wenxin, or the 6 Eternal River tier elites, all of them were bloodied and riddled with wounds. It wouldn't be surprising regardless of which side was defeated. After all, the battle prowess of the 2 sides was far too similar. More and more senior disciples arrived, yet they were all stunned by what they saw. Were those 2 truly new disciples? In any case, there were numerous Eternal River tier elites among the newly arrived senior disciples. As long as a few of them joined the battle, Ling Han and Empress Wenxin would certainly suffer defeat. After all, their power was limited, and they didn't have any other allies, either. Sure enough, it wasn't long before another Eternal River tier elite joined the battle. Although he was only at the low extreme, he was adding danger to an already perilous situation. In fact, his participation was enough to affect the direction of the battle. Moreover, if one person joining wasn't enough, they could always get 2 people, 3 people, or even 4 people to join. The situation became more and more perilous for Ling Han and Empress Wenxin. Chapter 1474 Difficult Battle. Regardless of whether it was Ling Han or Empress Wenxin, both were incredibly proud individuals who could accept defeat but certainly not humiliation. Thus, they definitely wouldn't give in to the senior disciples. However, their situation was extremely dire, with an additional 6 Eternal River tier elites joining in on the battle. It was useless regardless of how powerful they were. The gulf between their cultivation levels and numbers was far too great to overcome. In fact, being able to resist for so long was already a miracle. Moreover, Ling Han's wounds still had yet to fully recover, and he had more so already consumed all of his indestructible true fluid as well as used rising from the ashes. Right now, he was in his weakest state. However, the more this was so, the more his fighting spirit burned. At this moment, his fighting spirit was soaring into the skies. The spectating disciples were astonished by what they saw. This new disciple is genuinely impressive. His fighting spirit is so intense. How many heavenly body tier cultivators dare to battle against 12 Eternal River tier elites? And their soaring fighting spirit. To say nothing of battling against them, just facing this many Eternal River tier elites is enough to make one go weak at the knees. However, they're already at the end of their power. They're destined to lose. Naturally. No matter how powerful they are, they still can't break the tradition of the Academy. That's tradition, and new disciples must taste some hardship. The disciples were all impressed by Ling Han and Empress Wenxin's strength. However, when it came to the problem of achieving victory, no one had any confidence that they could win. Right now, they were only being attacked by senior disciples at the low extreme of the Eternal River tier. Taking into account the current battle situation, those at the medium extreme, high extreme, and consummate level all felt it beneath themselves to participate in the battle. However, if the senior disciples at the low extreme couldn't defeat these two new disciples, then those at the medium extreme and high extreme would naturally jump in to help. The tradition couldn't be broken. Xiao. Another elite at the low extreme of the Eternal River tier joined the battle. This was also the last elite at the low extreme of the Eternal River tier in the 8th campus. The situation became even direr. Even though only one more person had joined, the pressure on Ling Han and Empress Wenxin instantly exploded by more than tenfold. Perhaps this was the last straw that would break the camel's back. In the distance, a handsome and elegant youth stood proudly on a mountain. He was dressed in white, and his face was smooth and jade-like. There was an azure glow around him, making him appear like a mighty and divine king. There were many senior disciples around him, though not a single one of them dared to near him. Whenever they glanced at him, there would be boundless respect and reverence in their eyes. This was a giant among the senior disciples. His name was Wenxin, and he had already reached the consummate level of the Eternal River tier 7 million years ago. Right now, he was already at the peak stage of the consummate level. His strength was unfathomable, and he was more so only a step away from reaching the Genesis tier. However, it was this step that severed the path of many people. Among the hundreds of nearby galaxies and thousands of nearby great stars, which planet didn't have cultivators at the peak stage of the consummate level of the Eternal River tier? However, in the countless years that had passed, how many of them had managed to break through and advance to the Genesis tier? What did it matter that one was supremely talented? Perhaps they could reach the peak stage of the consummate level of the Eternal River tier in just 10 million years. However, in the remaining 400 million years of their life, they could only spend it in a menial matter, gradually watching themselves leaving youth and stepping into old age. Their vitality would also continue to weaken, all the way until their eventual death. Even so, these kinds of beings could still be regarded as supreme beings no matter where they went. Beneath saints, they were invincible. A smile spread across Wenxin's face, and he said to himself, at that time, even I chose to bow my head. That left a weakness in my mind, and even until now, I still can't see any hope of breaking through. If I head over to help and resolve their situation, perhaps I can elevate the state of my mind. However, they have to at least withstand this wave of attacks. Otherwise, they won't have the right to justify my interference. Beneath him, Ling Han and Empress Wenxin were already on the verge of defeat. They were battling against 13 Eternal River tier elites. They were at a crushing disadvantage. 9 bodies, chaotic world technique. Empress Wenxin roared softly. Wang. 9 beams of brilliant light instantly burst from her body, soaring into the sky. They then shot back down, fusing into her body and elevating her cultivation level by a significant amount. This was a secret technique of the 9 Deaths Heaven art. It could draw on the power of her 9 bodies, thereby allowing her power to grow explosively for a short period of time. Shatter. She aggressively charged forward, ripping a hole in her opponent's defenses. Ling Han also seized this opportunity to charge forward. He held the divine demon sword in one hand and the damaged wooden sword in the other as he dashed toward the silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple. This senior disciple had been wounded before, and he was more so showing signs of exhaustion after battling against them for so long. Thus, he was the weak link among the 13 Eternal River tier elites. Shwa. Ling Han slashed down with both swords. Even though the silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple was at the Eternal River tier, he still didn't dare to face this attack head-on. He could only choose to retreat. After all, he was aware of just how powerful these 2 swords were. If he were directly struck by them, he would definitely suffer severe damage to his origin power. In fact, he might even suffer damage to his life force. However, even though his retreat was quick enough for him to dodge the swords, it wasn't quick enough for him to dodge the sword chi that burst forth from them. Wounds appeared on both his chest and abdomen. At this moment, he appeared to be in a very sorry state. Meanwhile, Ling Han didn't feel good either. After launching the attack, he was met with the wild counterattacks of the 12 other Eternal River tier elites. He suffered heavy blows to his waist, legs, abdomen, and chest. As freakish as his physique was, he still couldn't help but cough up mouthfuls of blood. In any case, it was still thanks to his powerful physique that he could withstand their attacks at all. If it had been another person, they would have definitely been rendered immobile, if not killed. Ling Han was drenched in blood, yet he was still standing as straight as a spear. The silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple was already unable to battle any longer. There was a haughty look in Ling Han's eyes as he gazed at the 12 remaining elites. It was as if he were a large mountain that would never collapse, one that people could only look up to. Is there anyone else? Ling Han roared. Although he was wounded, his aura had elevated to another level. The 12 elites were momentarily dazed by his domineering aura. However, they quickly came to their senses, with rage emerging on their faces. You're far too arrogant. Even though the silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple has lost the ability to battle, your wounds aren't light either. Although you used wounds to exchange wounds, we still have 12 other members. Is it not abundantly clear who can afford to exchange wounds for wounds? The senior disciples were all furious as they attacked. They definitely had to teach this new disciple a harsh lesson and reinstate the reputation of the senior disciples. Meanwhile, there was a murderous aura on Empress Wenxin's beautiful face. Ling Han had been wounded, and she could see this clearly. There was a stabbing pain in her heart. She was enraged, and origin power started to surge from her body like waves. This origin power was intertwined with her rage. At the same time, her hair started to billow and dance in the air like snakes. Under her wrathful rage, her bloodline had surprisingly awakened one step further. Die. Neither side wanted to retreat, nor was any room for retreat. The only option was to fight until a victor was determined. Ling Han continued to exchange wounds for wounds, causing another 3 elites to lose their ability to battle. However, his own wounds also became increasingly severe. There was almost no good skin on his body, and through his battered flesh, even his godly bones could be seen. This caused everyone to feel numb with shock and astonishment. They were all moved by Ling Han's willpower and fighting spirit. It was definitely no coincidence that he had made it to where he was now. Fight, fight, fight. It appeared as if Ling Han would collapse after being struck by one more attack. However, in reality, he picked himself up time and time again. It was as if he were an undying god of war. Meanwhile, the number of his opponents continued to slowly decrease. Right now, there were only 7 senior disciples remaining. At this rate, if Ling Han didn't fall, it was truly possible that he might defeat all 13 of the Eternal River tier elites. Could Ling Han really persist until the end? His body was swaying and drenched in blood, and it was as if he could barely maintain his balance. Only his eyes remained incredibly bright and dazzling. Xiao! A figure in white suddenly appeared at this moment, and he radiated with a powerful aura that seemed as if it could suppress the heavens. He was Ren Feiyun, an elite at the consummate level of the Eternal River tier. Chapter 1475 Resolution. What? Ren Feiyun was going to make a move. He was at the consummate level of the Eternal River tier, and was who knew how many thousand times stronger than the 13 elites previously. If he moved, that would definitely be a completely one-sided obliteration. Even if Ling Han and Empress Wenxin were in their prime, even if their number was 100 times over, they would not be able to sustain a single blow from him. Initially, there were a few Eternal River tier elites planning to make a move, but when they saw Ren Feiyun appear, they all dismissed that idea. A big shot had appeared, so what need was there for others to interfere? Ling Han's figure wavered. He was really at the end of his rope. He did not have rising from the ashes, and did not have the indestructible true fluid to instantly heal his injuries, so all the injuries he suffered were real. He was defiant, he was unyielding. He wanted to fight to the end. Ren Feiyun smiled slightly, and said, "Don't worry, I am not here to battle with you too. It is not my style to use my strength to bully others." He swept an eye over the gathered masses, and continued, "This ends here." What? Ren Feiyun was actually not here to suppress Ling Han and Empress Wenxin, and instead was here to help the two of them. This was unimaginable. Still, a big shot had appeared, so even if the others were dissatisfied, so what? Did they dare to say anything in disagreement? There were only a mere 4 of such big shots, the likes of Ren Feiyun, in the whole 8th campus, and every single one of them was an overlord that could look down proudly on the rest of the world. "Ren Feiyun, do you want to break the tradition?" A slow voice rang out, and a figure appeared out of thin air. It was a middle-aged man, and there was actually a silvery fish fin growing out of his back. His hands were also webbed, and it could be confirmed that he was a demonic beast that had taken human form, his original form being a fish. "It's Senior Brother Kai." "Kai Miao, Senior Brother Kai!" everyone exclaimed. This was another big shot, a peer of Ren Feiyun. Furthermore, he had entered into the martial arts academy at an even earlier time. His seniority was higher than even that of a great many of their teachers, and he had strong abilities. It could be claimed that aside from the Tranquil Heart Saint, no one could control him at all. Traditions can vary for different individuals. Naturally, they can also be abolished for different individuals, Ren Feiyun said calmly, though there was a powerful determination penetrating through his tone. "Oh, are you still bearing a grudge against me for forcing you to squeeze into the dog's hole those years ago?" Kai Miao said, his voice low, but his words were piercingly painful. Though they were both big shots now, Kai Miao had entered the academy earlier than Ren Feiyun, and when Ren Feiyun had come here as a new student, it was precisely Kai Miao playing host, delivering a sharp, direct blow right at the prodigies of that time, ripping their pride to absolute pieces. Thus, there was actually lingering animosity between the two great big shots. Ren Feiyun was still calm and unperturbed. "At the time, my abilities were inadequate, and I could not resist. However, this time, if you want to make these two yield, you have to go through me first. Old Ren, you have gone too far." Another big shot appeared. He had a tough and stocky build, and was actually 3 meters tall. He truly had the head of a tiger. When he spoke, he spat out heavenly bodies as if he could swallow the moons and stars just by opening his mouth. This was the oldest big shot in the 8th campus. He was not a demonic beast, but was rather a unique creature birthed by the heaven and earth, yet none knew what kind of creature he actually was even till today. This person's name was Chi. Because it was difficult to address him by only a single word, after he entered into the 8th campus, he was gifted a name by the Tranquil Heart Saint, and was called Chi Tian. Anyways, he was very strong, extremely strong. And now, 2 big shots had appeared in opposition of Ren Feiyan. Ren Feiyan was unafraid. Since he had made his choice, he naturally knew what he would be facing. He was still calm, and said, "I have gone too far." "I have not gone too far, I have only moved on. What need is there to inflict the humiliation I have previously suffered on every generation of new students? Let us just do away with such rules." "Nonsense," Chi Tian uttered coldly. "Not even the saints have ever objected to this rule, so what right do you have to doubt the existence of this rule? Get lost." Kai Miao rebuked. The relations between himself and Ren Feiyan had always been poor, and now, he did not have anything polite left to say. The last big shot did not appear. She was the only female among the 4 great big shots. Her name was Yususu, and her achievements in the field of formations were the highest. She was also the one who was the most favored by the Tranquil Heart Saint, who had implied that he wanted to pass on his teachings to her. Then, in Yususu's absence, 2 against 1, Ren Feiyan was still at an absolute disadvantage. Ren Feiyan shook his right hand, incredibly confident and at ease. "Then let's settle this with a battle." He had also expressed his determination to be absolutely unyielding. "Ren Feiyan, you are too arrogant." Kai Miao moved, and shot out a palm strike. Boom, dark clouds rolled out in the skies, and a heavy downpour descended. And the frightening thing was that the rainwater was filled with corrosive effects. Should anyone stand under this rain, wounds would definitely appear on his body, and even a defense of origin power was unable to stop it. This was the strength of the big shots. If I were to cover the skies, all would be dark and without light. Ren Feiyan delivered a palm strike as well. His fingers flowed, and billions of formation patterns flickered. Boom! The 2 great big shots exchanged a blow, and even the whole academy shook. Even if there were protective formations carved by the saint, the academy almost collapsed. Humph! Chi Tian also moved, and worked together with Kai Miao to suppress Ren Feiyan. The rules of the academy could not be broken, and it could not start from their 8th campus either. The 3 big shots fought fiercely. The others did not even have the qualification to interfere. If a single shock wave swept over them, it was enough to make an elite in the high extreme of Eternal River Tier throw up blood. Ling Han and Empress Wenxin both stepped back. Their fighting spirit blazed, and there was a powerful rage in their hearts. They had not trifled with anyone, yet were forced to climb into a dog's hole. If they resisted, they would be suppressed. Why? Why did I have to suffer such humiliation? The 2 of them were both incredibly proud people, and would rather die than bend to the will of others. If they were really no match for them, they would rather turn around and leave, and withdraw from the martial arts academy. And now, when they saw Ren Feiyan fight for their sake, they were both touched and furious, and also felt a powerful sullenness. The 3 big shots engaged in an earth-shattering battle royale. Stop! A soft exclamation was heard, yet brought with it a supreme air of might and dignity. Boom! The battle between the 3 big shots came to a sudden and abrupt halt. In the face of this voice, even if they joined forces, they were still unqualified to resist. Because this was the Tranquil Heart Saint. Previously, it had only been a small-scale conflict, so the Tranquil Heart Saint could overlook it, but now that the 3 great big shots were in a mighty battle, he could no longer ignore this. If they were really allowed to continue fighting, even the 8th campus could possibly be razed to the ground. "We accept the saintly decree," everyone exclaimed with reverence. Saints were aloof and remote, and could create a world with a single thought, or destroy a world with a single thought. They could not be disrespected in the slightest. Step down, all of you, the Tranquil Heart Saint said calmly, but this was a conclusion to today's matter. They were not allowed to make any further noise, or it would be equivalent to disobeying the saintly decree. Yes, everyone replied with another bow, and retreated respectively. However, before he left, Kai Miao cast an eye on Ling Han and Empress Wenxin, and said, Old Four Ren, you can protect them for a while, but will not be able to protect them their whole lives. It is impossible that the rules of the academy will be broken for you, and will not be possibly broken for them either. After he said this, he left proudly, and did not take Ling Han and Empress Wenxin's reactions to heart at all. In his eyes, the two of them were ants in the first place, so what need was there for him to be concerned about them? Empress Wenxin was supporting Ling Han, and Ling Han had practically lost all his strength, weakly leaning on the Empress, and allowing her to help him enter the great doors. He turned around to look at the dog's hole, his eyes menacing. He would remember this grudge. Then, his eyelids became heavy, and he soon passed out. When he came back to consciousness, he saw that he was already lying on a bed. The majority of his injuries had healed. Even without him actively channeling the indestructible heaven scroll, it still had a very strong healing effect. You've woken up, the Empress said as she entered the room, a beautiful smile on her face. Chapter 1476 Choosing Formations. How long have I been unconscious? Ling Han asked. 10 days. The Empress sat by his bedside, and gazed at him tenderly. With such a sweet-smelling beauty right in front of him, Ling Han couldn't help but feel his heart throb. Bringing the Empress into his arms, he pressed a kiss on her red lips, and said, I've made you worry. The Empress smiled gently, and said, I did not worry. I knew that you would be fine. Ling Han felt rueful. The Empress's gentleness was different from that of others. Her concern for him was also filled with a strong confidence in him. This room was the Empress's, and it was her who had been taking care of him these few days. Ling Han and the Empress were lovey-dovey for a while, but fearing that they would go too far, he could only reluctantly call a halt. He got off the bed, and picked up the jade scroll on the table to familiarize himself with the situation in the martial arts academy. The Tranquil Heart Saint had become a saint with his formation techniques. Thus, he also placed a great importance on teaching formation techniques. Every 10 years, he would hold a seminar to pass on his Tao and teach formation techniques. At other times, Eternal River tier-level teachers would be responsible for explaining and clearing up doubts. Additionally, there was also a library in the academy, and there were a great many formation techniques, cultivation techniques, and secret techniques inside. They could be freely perused without any restriction. However, this also meant that there couldn't possibly be anything too impressive inside. How could high-grade techniques be so easily taught? Ling Han had a great many cultivation techniques and secret techniques of Genesis tier level of the celestial realm, so he did not need to obtain more secret techniques. However, he had been aiming for formation techniques, and that was why he had enrolled into the campus of the Tranquil Heart Saint. But under the condition that cultivation level did not change, formations could greatly increase battle prowess. Come, let's go and check out the library. He was filled with longing to increase his strength. Empress Wenxin nodded. She, too, felt sullen. The two of them exited, and immediately garnered the attention of a great many people who pointed at them. Some were even whispering among themselves. Senior Brother Ling. Someone approached them and advised, you had best not go out. The senior brothers in the medium extreme of the Eternal River tier have already announced that if Senior Brother Ling dared to take one step outside, they would come over and make trouble for you. In the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy, one's quarters was a place of absolute safety, and none were allowed to disturb others in their quarters. However, if one exited, then they had best pray for good luck. Aside from the fact that murder, damage to the life force, and crippling the foundations of others were not allowed, they could fight as much as they liked. The academy completely did not care at all. Only the fiercest and cruelest battles would help Prodigy stand out among the masses and climb to a higher level. Ling Han nodded, but since he had come out this time, it was naturally impossible for him to turn right around and go back. He continued walking on with Empress Wenxin, entered into the library, and began searching for formation techniques. Not long after, one after another, powerful auras flickered. Some elites had arrived, but did not make a move yet. There were some places in which making a commotion was strictly banned, such as the living quarters of every student. The library was another such forbidden place. Thus, before Ling Han and Empress Wenxin left, no one would make a move. Ling Han ignored them. He was searching for cultivation techniques. There was a large area here which contained jade scrolls with formation techniques. One only had to place them against their forehead, and they would be able to see all types of information about formation techniques in their mind. 9 stars heavenly spiritual formation. 10 kill formation. Cold viper red clouds formation. Ling Han looked through them one by one as he continued to absorb a great amount of common knowledge about formation techniques. This common knowledge was based on using oneself as a formation. To inscribe a formation inside one's body was not something that could be easily undertaken. The moment a formation became active, it was equivalent to exploding first in one's body. Without a tough physique, no one could sustain that. However, one's physique had its limits. It was very difficult for even saints to cultivate their physique to the level of the highest grade godly metal. Thus, a different approach had to be taken if one wanted to use oneself as a formation. The Tranquil Heart Saint's method was to fuse the bones in his body with a certain amount of godly metal, and semi-metallize his bone structure to increase their strength. In that way, he would be able to inscribe formation patterns. However, godly metal itself brought its own murderous aura. If one was struck, it would cause great damage. Thus, there was a limit to the amount of godly metal that every cultivator could embed in themselves, and there was also a limit to the grade too. Of course, the higher the cultivation level, the higher the grade of godly metal that could be fused, and the greater the amount too. Ordinarily, cultivators could only integrate a grade of godly metal that was close to their own cultivation level. For example, those in the low extreme of the Eternal River tier could integrate level 13 godly metal, whereas those in the consummate level could integrate level 16. Even saints were no exception. Though the Tranquil Heart Saint had walked this path to the level of great accomplishment, the grade of godly metal he could fuse with was only level 16. When Ling Han finished reading this information, he couldn't help the strange expression that appeared on his face. Wasn't this made for him precisely? The strength of his physique was above level 13, slightly below level 14. Added with the healing effects that the indestructible heaven scroll had on his body, his bone structure could completely be used like it was level 14 godly metal to inscribe formation patterns that were equivalent to the medium extreme of the Eternal River tier. In that way, his battle prowess would be frighteningly increased. There would not be many even among the senior students that could be a match for him. He became excited. It was impossible for his cultivation level to soar in a short period of time, unless he could once again obtain precious treasures of the celestial realm, such as the Sun Stone. However, he was also afraid. If he again advanced 3 levels successively in one go, he would definitely be struck dead by the heavenly tribulation. What was more amazing was that the formation techniques in the library went as far up as level 15, which completely satisfied his needs. Only saint-level formation techniques could not be taught to outsiders. One first had to attain a higher level before he could be personally taught by the Tranquil Heart Saint. It was naturally impossible that one could brand level 17 formations in one's body if one was not a saint. Instead, they would use godly metal to lay out the formation, such as the Great Protective Formation of the 8th Campus. Once it was activated, even lower-level saints could be killed. Search for the strongest formation that he could inscribe in his present state. By then, it would become one of his strongest trump cards. Others would only think that he was in the heavenly body tier, with power equivalent to the low extreme of Eternal River tier, but in truth, if those in the medium extreme of Eternal River tier dared underestimate him, they, too, would be killed by his hand. It is this one, Yin-Yang 5-element formation. Ling Han drew out a jade scroll, and pressed it on his forehead. He then completely burnt the formation patterns into his mind. He did not need to understand it now, he only needed to brand it into his mind first. Later, he would slowly understand it underneath the reincarnation tree. This formation technique belonged to the top grade among level 14 formation techniques. Its might was equivalent to the peak stage of the medium extreme of the Eternal River tier. Ling Han knew that there were a great many senior students waiting for him outside, but he did not care. He exchanged a smile with Empress Wenxin, and both of them entered into the Black Tower. He recited the cultivation techniques that he had obtained from Hu one after another to see which one was more suited for Empress Wenxin. Soon after, the Empress made her decision. She merely had to understand the cultivation technique thoroughly, and added with her bloodline of an ancient divine tribe as well as her own natural talent, along with comprehending Tao beneath the reincarnation tree, she should be able to complete her breakthrough in an extremely short amount of time. They began cultivating in isolation, uncaring of all else. Yet it had become complete chaos in the outside world. Previously, the two of them had been clearly seen entering into the library. How had they disappeared all of a sudden? They entered, and carefully searched, yet were unable to find any trace of Ling Han and the Empress. They must have hidden themselves in a spatial god tool. In the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy, though spatial god tools were still considered precious treasures, it was not something that had never been seen before, and some like Yususu, who had garnered much favor from the Tranquil Heart Saint, had even been bestowed a spatial god tool. Yet spatial god tools were not formless, so they definitely could be found. Search. They searched thoroughly, but even if saints made a move, they could not possibly discover the Black Tower, what more them? It was fated that their hard effort would result in nothing. Chapter 1477 10 Killing Formations. Inside the Black Tower, underneath the reincarnation tree, Ling Han and Empress Wenxin sat down on the ground, and worked earnestly on their comprehension. One was determined to rush up to Eternal River tier in the shortest time possible, while the other wanted to fully grasp the Yin-Yang 5-element formation, and inscribe it on his bones so that he would become a human killing formation. Time passed very quickly. In the blink of an eye, a year had passed. Under the reincarnation tree, the two people that seemed to have turned into stones suddenly moved, and opened their eyes practically at the same time. Exchanging a look, both revealed a smile. I can attempt to break through to Eternal River tier. I have fully understood the formation. Both of them were filled with confidence. Their battle prowess would soon be greatly boosted. They exited the Black Tower. A year had passed, and naturally, no one was still watching for them outside the library. They boldly walked out and returned to their own courtyard. When the senior students heard the news and appeared, the couple had entered into their rooms, and naturally, they could only hop around in fury. Ling Han opened his cauldron and began refining alchemical pills. Breaking through to Eternal River tier was not something to be done casually. It required the accumulation of a frightening amount of origin power, or it would be one's own life force that would be exhausted. There were many people who had not accumulated enough, and their own life force was not strong enough either. Ultimately, their life force was completely exhausted, and they ended up dying from exhaustion. Thus, this could not be rushed. The best alchemical pill for breaking through to the Eternal River tier was the Great Amplification Pill. It could not increase one's comprehension, but could supply endless amounts of origin power, and allow cultivators to be spared from the fate of being sucked dry by their soaring cultivation level. Ordinarily, about 100 pills was enough. However, for the sake of his wife, Ling Han was naturally not going to be satisfied with a mere 100. He refined over 1,000 in one go, and only then did he stop in discontent. Though this was one of the higher grade pills among level 12 divine pills, the time needed to refine it was extremely short. He could refine a cauldron's worth in a single day. With Ling Han's abilities, he could refine about 20 pills in a single batch. Thus, the matter was completely settled in 50 days. Even if she didn't use all of them, that was fine. Wouldn't he also have to break through? And there was the Rain Emperor, the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden, and the others. There were plenty of people that would need them. He handed the alchemical pills over to Empress Wenxin, and the Empress took the lead in going into seclusion for the breakthrough. Ling Han called Biyao over, and asked him about what had happened in this year's time. Taking the new students down a notch was a tradition of the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy, and was not merely limited to the 8th campus. It was a rule that was present in every campus. Ling Han was not the only one who had attempted to resist. The Rain Emperor had resisted, Gu Daoyi had resisted, Ding Ping had resisted, and the notionless saint had resisted, but it was useless. No matter how much of a prodigy you were, you would still be limited by your cultivation level. How would a heavenly body tier be any match for an eternal river tier? Even those at the peak of the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier were only equivalent to being at the low extreme of the eternal river tier, and would obviously only be suppressed. Such proud people like the Rain Emperor and Gu Daoyi had battled to the last moment. But they were not as fortunate as Ling Han and Empress Wenxin, wherein a big shot had stepped out to block the fires for their sake. Even if Gu Daoyi possessed a saint tool, it had only led to the mobilization of a senior student in the medium extreme of the Eternal River tier to suppress him. Most people had obediently crawled through the dog hole, and troublemakers were all knocked unconscious and forcibly shoved through. In short, none were spared. Apparently, Gu Daoyi had fallen ill from his infuriation after the matter, and had only recovered after lying in bed for a good few months. After Ling Han heard this, he couldn't help but grin. He could understand. Gu Daoyi was the first Severance Grand Elder from the Celestial Realm, and now, he was forced to crawl into a dog hole by a few eternal river tears. The shadow in his heart had to be indescribably huge. Yet the fact that the Rain Emperor, the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden, and the others had suffered this humiliation as well caused Ling Han's eyes to grow cold. He was determined to seek an accounting for this debt. But this required strength. Without strength, everything was mere words. Ling Han taught some cultivation technique to Biyao, and told him to send it over to the Rain Emperor and the others. It was definitely of a higher grade than what could be obtained in the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. Meanwhile, he himself immediately went into seclusion. He was going to begin inscribing formation patterns in his body, and inscribe the yin-yang 5-element formation. In the year of comprehension previously spent under the reincarnation tree, he had already grasped this formation technique. And now, it was the time to turn his understanding into reality. However, it was extremely difficult to inscribe on one's godly bones. One would have to use their divine sense like a blade, and make the inscriptions bit by bit. At any other time, Ling Han would definitely be unable to do so. Because his success came from his physique, and so did his failure. His godly bones were as high a grade as level 13 and above, and were close to level 14. Even he himself could not do anything to them, so how was he supposed to inscribe the formation patterns? Thankfully, he now had the 9 heavens flame. This was not only an immortal flame, but was also one of the 9 great ancestral flames, and now, it had become his essence divine flames, and could be commanded by his will. Inscribing on his godly bones had thus become possible. Ling Han inscribed one formation pattern after another. His speed could not be considered fast, but was not slow, either. There were only a total of 3,600 formation patterns for the yin-yang 5-element formation, and he would be able to inscribe around 20 in 2 hours. Thus, in a mere half-month's time, he had completely inscribed the entire formation on his skeleton. Wasn't it said that everyone could only inscribe a single set of formation patterns inside his body? Ling Han was slightly surprised. That was because after he had inscribed a whole set of formation patterns, he had actually used up just 1/10 of his bones. I understand. This is because I used the immortal flame as my blade, so the formation patterns that I inscribed are extremely detailed and even, so the bones occupied would be less. Going by that understanding, wouldn't I then be able to inscribe a few great formations inside my body at the same time? If I activate them at the same time, the might. Haha. Then I will inscribe 10 yin-yang 5-element formations. Ling Han persisted in his efforts, and inscribed another 9 formations on his godly bones. He had used up a total of 5 months' time to finish the project. Ling Han came out of seclusion, while Empress Wenxin was still in seclusion. Breaking through to the Eternal River tier was not something to be accomplished in 1 or 2 days. However, one should not let go of the big prize while grabbing at trifles. I should still concentrate on martial arts. If I could break through to the Eternal River tier, I would be able to inscribe level 15 formations, and would be a match for the high extreme of the Eternal River tier. And if I could inscribe 10 formations, then it would not be difficult to kill even a cultivator at the peak of the high extreme of Eternal River tier. This would be my trump card. Who would have thought? The Tranquil Heart Saint would only host a seminar every 3 years, and counting the days, it should be these few days. I can go and listen. In future, if I want to inscribe saint-level formation patterns inside my body, I need a very deep understanding of the path of formations. Additionally, I would have to teach Jiuyao and Ding Ping too, or I would be too irresponsible as their master. Ling Han walked out of his courtyard and headed to where the Tranquil Heart Saint would speak about Tao. The venue was a public square, and all disciples were free to listen. However, it was definitely only close disciples that could listen to the information that truly involved saint-level knowledge. The moment he stepped out, he could see a person sneakily poke his head in. When he realized that Ling Han's eyes had swept over him, he hurriedly shrunk his head back and broke out in a run. Obviously, he had set out to inform the others. Ling Han did not stop him. What would come would come. In any case, he had already disclosed the fact that he had a spatial god tool, and he could use it without any reservations. After all, saints would be able to create spatial god tools, so it was not something that others would sacrifice everything to snatch it from him. Ling Han. He had not arrived at the public square when someone stood in his way. This was an elite in the medium extreme of the Eternal River tier. There was no need for the high extreme or the consummate level. The medium extreme was more than enough. If that was still incapable to suppress a mere heavenly body tier, what justice was left in this world? Ling Han showed a smile. The medium extreme? Very good. This was just the chance for him to test out the might of the Yin-Yang 5-element formation. Chapter 1478. The killing formation shows its Migh. The one standing in his way was a tall man with broad shoulders. He looked to be about in his 30s, and had been in the academy for an unknown number of years. It would probably be a very astonishing number of years, or he couldn't have possibly attained the medium extreme of the Eternal River tier. Advancing into the Eternal River tier itself needed a very, very long time. What more when he had advanced to the medium extreme? A dog blocking the way? Ling Han asked, smiling calmly. Wang, whom are you insulting? The large black dog appeared and disappeared unpredictably, and had extremely good hearing. He popped out in an instant. Brat, you dare look down on Grandpa Dog hiss. His dog's eyes widened in a glare directed at Ling Han. All the black fur on his body was standing on ends, and one of his tails was even standing upright like a javelin out of his steel undergarment. What medicine have you ingested, brat? Why are you giving Grandpa Dog a very scary feeling? The large black dog exclaimed in surprise. Ling Han was involuntarily shocked. This damn dog's senses were really sharp. Could it be that he had discovered the 10 killing formations inscribed in his body? He should not know the reason for it, but still could sense this kind of oppressive pressure. As expected of a dog that had been brought from the celestial realm. However, he was still a damn dog. Are you two finished? The man standing in the way was angered. Are the two of you playing around with me with your banter? Ling Han couldn't help but smile, and asked, You called me, so what business do you have to do with me? You are asking a question that you already know the answer to. The man smirked coldly. I am Jiao Yang, and have entered the academy 18 million years ago. I am your senior brother. Now that you have met me, should you not respectfully address me as senior brother? Ling Han waved a hand. Since you already said that I asked the question while knowing the answer, then I will ask you as well. If someone wants to slap your face, will you still politely address him as senior brother? The large black dog immediately interrupted and quipped, right, wouldn't that be being wretched? Zhao Yang's expression involuntarily darkened even further. At first, he had wanted to put on airs as a senior brother, and make Ling Han feel sullen first, yet he had not thought that Ling Han would actually be such a hoodlum that he would not give face to even him. A troublemaker was still a troublemaker, after all. No wonder he had dared to challenge the tradition of the academy. Unfortunately, his strength was too weak. Since you are still so stubborn, then as your senior brother, I can only choose to teach you what respect is. He made his move without any reservations. He stretched out a palm, and Wang, a silver river unfolded and heavenly bodies floated in the air. Though he was an elite of formations, the gap in their cultivation levels was too large. Merely with his own power, he would be able to completely suppress Ling Han, so what need was there for him to use the power of formations? Using a sledgehammer on a nut? This junior brother would not be worth him doing that. It was a simple palm, yet covered the ground and shadowed the skies. This was the strength of the eternal river tier. A casual strike would be able to drive the great power of the heaven and earth. Heavenly body tiers were completely no match for that. Ling Han naturally dared not be careless, either. With a thought, the 10 killing formations activated at the same time. Suddenly, the bones in his body lit up one by one, but because his physique was too powerful, his skin, flesh, and blood had forcibly concealed this kind of radiance, and at a glance, he was still incredibly ordinary. Yet the large black dog's fur stood on ends once more. He leaped 9 meters high into the air, and hurriedly ran in retreat. He had sensed that there seemed to be a frightening monster hidden inside Ling Han's body, and could easily kill even him. The reason why he was cunning was because he was highly skilled in the art of running for his life. Otherwise, if he would be turned into a dead dog at any random move, how could he possibly dare to be so arrogant? Ling Han casually waved his hand, and the lightning sword technique appeared, slicing towards Zhao Yang. Overestimating your own abilities. Zhao Yang humphed coldly. A heavenly body tier actually dared face him head-on. No matter how freakishly talented he was fated to lose. This brat thought that he could consider everyone else beneath him just because he had defeated a few in the low extreme of the eternal river tier? What a joke! Zhao Yang was in the medium extreme of the eternal river tier. Suppress. His right hand shook, and his fingers turned into a prison of heaven and earth, descending onto Ling Han. The fingers descended. They were obviously only 5 fingers, yet seemed like mountain peaks. Break. Ling Han stated indifferently. Sword chi struck. Boom, the mountain of 5 fingers were easily severed into pieces. Zhao Yang's mouth involuntarily gaped. This was too inconceivable. That was his attack, the attack of the medium extreme of the eternal river tier. How could it possibly be so easily and calmly broken? If you really had that kind of abilities, why would you have been so strained in the deadly battle with the 13 elites in the low extreme of the eternal river tier? That day, he, too, had witnessed the battle, and he could claim to be fully aware of the depth of Ling Han's abilities. If Ling Han's abilities could undergo such a massive transformation in a mere year's time, he definitely would not believe that had to be a lie. For those who had reached this kind of height like them, the time needed to improve their abilities by just a bit would have to be 10,000 years, and that was the minimum. What more when this wasn't just a bit, but rather 10,000 times. I've underestimated you. Though Zhao Yang was surprised, he did not lose his head. He had not used his full power in that last strike at all. At this moment, the bones inside his body glowed one after another. A killing formation was activated, and suddenly, the light of the 5 elements and the chi of yin-yang appeared on the surface of his body. The formation he had inscribed was actually the yin-yang 5-element formation as well. Get lost, he shouted loudly, and activated the formation's might to the fullest, not daring to underestimate Ling Han in the slightest bit any longer. This rookie was really too unique. Ling Han smiled calmly. You only have a single yin-yang 5-element formation, and as for me? 10. In a clash of 10 against 1, would I still be unable to beat a piece of trash like you? With a gesture of his finger, the lightning sword technique unfolded to the fullest, and underneath the rolling heavens might was the massive explosion of 10 yin-yang 5-element formations. Boom! Jiao Yang greeted the attack with his own formation, an expression of disdain on his face. He was sure that all the bones in Ling Han's body would be completely shattered under the crushing suppression of this attack. Of course, he would be careful and not kill Ling Han, nor would he damage his life force. This was the great taboo of the academy. However, his expression immediately became one of utter shock. That was because his attack fell apart with a single strike from Ling Han. How is this possible? The attack that should have been unable to resist a single blow should have been Ling Han's. Why was the tables turned around on him? Boom, wearing an expression of unfathomable disbelief, so much that he looked like he was doubting life itself, Jiao Yang was sent flying. He sputtered out a mouthful of blood that sprayed out into the skies, and seemed like a rainbow under the radiant sunlight. He landed heavily on the ground, and caused the dirt to fly up in a wave. A deathly silence fell over the surroundings. Ling Han was a celebrity now. Though he was a troublemaker that broke the rules in the eyes of the seniors, that did not stop him from becoming famous not only because of his nature-defying performance on the first day, but also because he had an exquisitely beautiful wife that would make anyone drool. When Jiao Yang appeared, those that planned to watch the excitement had naturally appeared as well to watch the battle, but who would have imagined that this would be the result? This was unrealistic. This was illogical. They must have seen a ghost. Everyone could not help but rub their eyes, and then look again, but the one lying on the ground was still Jiao Yang. He had really defied nature this time round. Everyone knew that the peak of the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier was equivalent to the strength of the low extreme of the eternal river tier, and strength did not represent battle prowess. Hence, some freaks were capable of matching even those at the middle stage, late stage, and even peak stage of the low extreme of the eternal river tier. That was still something that everyone could accept. But this time, it was an elite in the medium extreme, and furthermore, was not one in the early stage of the medium extreme either, but rather in the late stage. What the heck? Everyone could feel their hair stand on ends, as if their heads would be exploding at any second. Chapter 1479 Victory Again. At the last moment, Ling Han still withdrew some of the formation's might. Otherwise, this attack would not simply cause injury, but would crush Jiao Yang into dust. Combining these 10 killing formations as one did not simply increase their might by 10 times, but boosted their might 100-fold. Jiao Yang groaned. He felt that all the bones in his body had been broken, and he could not get to his feet at all. Ling Han walked over, and looked down on him. Then he squatted down beside Jiao Yang's head, and said, "Senior brother Jia, you have not said it yet. Why have you called me over? Sigh, you are already quite old, so why are you still so hot-tempered and quick to anger? Can't we talk things out politely?" Jiao Yang spat out a mouthful of blood and coughed endlessly as he pointed at Ling Han. If one could kill with a glare, Ling Han would definitely have been ripped into pieces. He was furious. Previously, Ling Han did not call him senior brother at all, and now, though he did, was that respecting him? This was absolutely a slap in his face. It was common knowledge that leaving a line in everything would allow for better relations in future. Going so far, were you planning to become the public enemy of the whole academy? In future, don't just casually talk about violence and murder, be good. Ling Han patted Jiao Yang's face, and then stood up. He still had to go and listen to the Tranquil Heart Saints seminar. The large black dog quickly ran behind him, but after taking a few steps, he couldn't help but turn back around and come back. He raised one of his back legs beside Zhao Yang's head, and a spray of liquid suddenly spewed out. As the saying went, a leopard could not change its spots. This involuntary action of leaving a mark when he met a target was also a habit that was embedded in his blood. Only then did the large black dog chase after Ling Han in satisfaction, but then he realized that he was a great elite. What elite would be prancing around on all four legs? Immediately, he stood on his back paws, and walked like he was a human. Zhao Yang was too pitiful. He spat out a successive 13 mouthfuls of blood, his legs stretched out, and he passed out. Actually, Ling Han had seen the dog's action, but did not stop him. Firstly, this was none of his business. Secondly, he had not trifled with anyone, and it was Zhao Yang himself who had approached to ask for a beating. He had merely sought his own humiliation. "Little Black, you are really despicable," Ling Han said sincerely. The old ginseng and the rabbit were only rookies in front of this large black dog. "This is how I am. If you dare say another word about me being despicable, Grandpa Dog will get angry with you." The large black dog swept an eye over Ling Han's neck. "Little Han, will you truly not consider becoming my mount? I can teach you supreme cultivation techniques. Get lost." Ling Han shot out a foot in a kick, but the large black dog was incredibly intelligent. With a leap, he had long since dodged the attempted blow. The man and dog left boldly and openly. At first it was a complete silence, but then a world-shaking uproar exploded. "My heavens, senior brother Zhao lost. And furthermore, it's a terrible defeat. How could this be possible? Senior brother Jia is in the late stage of the medium extreme of the eternal river tier, and furthermore, has inscribed the yin-yang 5-element formation in his body. How could he possibly be no match for a heavenly body tier? Even if I saw it with my own eyes, I do not dare believe it at all. Could it be that the senior brothers in the high extreme would have to move out?" Everyone looked at each other, and suddenly had a feeling that even if those in the high extreme came, it was not certain that they would be able to suppress him. They went off in all directions, hurriedly bringing this astonishing news to even more people. Ling Han had really rocketed into the skies. Even one in the medium extreme of the eternal river tier could not suppress him. Ling Han and the large black dog had arrived at the public square in the center of the academy. There was a stage as tall as 9 meters in the middle of the public square. There was no one on the stage, but the area around it was already fully occupied. The Tranquil Heart Saint had not arrived yet, and the seminar had not begun. Ling Han breathed a sigh of relief. He had thankfully not missed it. "Little Black, you seem to be doing quite well around here," he asked the large black dog. This despicable dog had not been taken in by any saint, but he had seen him make trouble in the academy quite a few times, and no one had actually stepped out to discipline him. Xiao, with a flash, he had dodged a sudden bite from the large black dog. The large black dog humphed, and declared, "Call me Grandpa Black." "Grandpa Black, got it?" Ling Han merely chuckled, and pretended he had not heard him. "I am the auspicious sign of heaven and earth, and am loved by all who see me," the large black dog boasted shamelessly. Ling Han really wanted to deliver a kick right at him. He called himself loved by all who saw him? If he was really tossed out, those who wanted to kill him could form a long queue that could wind a good few times around Woodfigure Planet. In only a while, a sudden commotion began among the gathered masses. They whispered furiously to one another, all looking stunned or wearing expressions of disbelief. With Ling Han's ears, he naturally could hear everything clearly. They were all discussing what had happened just now, how he had seriously wounded Zhao Yang with a single blow. "That's got to be fake, how could that be possible?" "That's right, senior brother Jia is in the late stage of the medium extreme of the eternal river tier, and furthermore, he has grasped the yin-yang 5-element formation. To defeat him, one would have to be at the peak of the medium extreme, at least, what more to defeat him with a single strike. Only one in the early stage of the high extreme would be able to do that. Don't tell me that a heavenly body tier could possess the battle prowess of the high extreme of the eternal river tier. I wouldn't believe that even if it killed me. It is absolutely impossible. Even if he had a saint tool, it would still be impossible. Limited by cultivation level, heavenly body tiers definitely could not possibly force too much might out from a saint tool. Everyone was shaking their head. At first, they were stunned, but what quickly followed was doubt. Not a single person believed it. Even those that had witnessed the scene with their own eyes were doubting what they had seen, what more when they were just finding out from hearsay. Ling Han is over there, someone exclaimed suddenly, pointing at Ling Han. Ling Han had not hidden himself and was just openly standing right there, so he was naturally eye-grabbing. Everyone's eyes were attracted by this pointing gesture. What did the fact that Ling Han had appeared mean? It meant that Zhao Yang had definitely failed to snipe him. Gasp. Could it be that the rumor was true? Ling Han had really defeated Zhao Yang? Xiao, a figure directly flew into the skies above Ling Han. There was a galaxy winding around behind him, exuding an endless aura. This was an elite in the medium extreme of the Eternal River tier, and was also one of the strongest few in the public square. For those big shots like Ren Feiyun and elites of the high extreme of Eternal River tier, they represented the strongest battle prowess of the 8th campus, so they had naturally received favorable treatment from the Tranquil Heart Saint. Usually, they would be called over, and be taught formation Dao of a higher level. In this kind of general seminar, those big shots and supreme elites would not be coming. That was because they would not benefit much even if they did. They had already grasped this knowledge millions of years ago. I do not believe that you are able to defeat Zhao Yang. Take a blow from me. The man did not say another word, and immediately made his move. He stretched out a finger, which formed into a golden spear that swung with suppressive force down on Ling Han. He seemed like he was intending to pierce Ling Han right through. Ling Han was irritated. He clenched a fist and brazenly greeted the incoming blow with his own attack. Pung! The 10 killing formations showed their weight. An endless murderous aura surged out, capable of piercing a hole in the sky itself. It was as if that man was made out of paper. He was sent flying by the force, blood spewing madly from his mouth. Wherever his blood landed, there was a commotion. This was the blood of the Eternal River tier. A single drop was heavier than even a mountain, and more so brought with it his boundless life essence, so its destructive ability was incredibly frightening. Boom! The man collapsed on the ground, foaming from his mouth, his limbs twitching slightly. An uproar erupted. Chapter 1480 Summoned by a Sain. Just then, they had still been saying that Ling Han couldn't possibly have defeated Zhao Yang. They had said that this was merely a rumor. However, what now? Ling Han had defeated another disciple who was just as powerful as Zhao Yang right before their very eyes. He had defeated them head-on, and he hadn't used any underhanded techniques either. He had achieved a crushing victory with a single strike. Everyone was transfixed with shock. Wang! The sound of the great Tao suddenly traveled over from heaven and earth. At the same time, a golden lotus started to descend from the sky. This was an indescribably blissful scene. This signified the arrival of a saint. Looking up, they could see that the Tranquil Heart Saint had suddenly appeared atop the golden lotus. No one knew how he had arrived, yet it was as if he were always meant to be there. The saint swept his gaze over the cultivators. However, he suddenly paused when he saw Ling Han. A look of astonishment spread across his face. He hadn't used an air of primal chaos to mask his face, and thus everyone could see his expression of astonishment. This. Saints would be unblinking even if the heavens were to collapse before them. With a casual wave of their hand, they would be able to stabilize and support the sky. Thus, how could they be astonished? What had he detected from Ling Han? It was extraordinary enough to astonish even a saint. However, this also seemed to make sense. After all, who had ever witnessed a heavenly body tier cultivator defeating an Eternal River tier elite before? This was an elite at the medium extreme of the Eternal River tier, no less. The Tranquil Heart Saint observed Ling Han for a moment longer before retracting his gaze, and saying, "We'll discuss the basic transformations of formations today. Tao begets 1, 1 begets 2, 2 begets 3, and 3 begets all matter." The Tranquil Heart Saint started to teach his disciples, explaining profound principles in simple and easily understandable language. As a saint, his understanding of formations was naturally in-depth and profound. Thus, he was able to clearly explain and analyze all kinds of details easy to miss. The disciples before him continued to nod in realization and understanding. These were things that they would often neglect. However, pondering it carefully, they realized that their grasp of these areas wasn't as solid as they had imagined. There was still much room for improvement. Ling Han also continued to reinforce his knowledge. With this knowledge, he was preparing to tackle saint-level formations. Things that were related to saints were all profound and extraordinary. One would need to accumulate boundless knowledge before they could comprehend saint-level matters. If one wanted to master saint-level formations, they would need to fully comprehend all of the foundations of the Tao of formations. Merely copying the construction of the formations wouldn't be enough. Thus, Ling Han was captivated by the teachings of the saint. Anyhow, he possessed a reincarnation tree, so compared to others, he would have 400 times the amount of time to digest and comprehend this information. The teachings of the saint lasted for half a month. After finishing his teachings, the Tranquil Heart Saint suddenly said, "Ling Han, come to the Tranquil Heart Pavilion." The Tranquil Heart Pavilion was where the Tranquil Heart Saint normally resided. This pavilion was located inside the 8th campus, and it was most certainly a holy land of the academy. Only a rare few people could enter this pavilion. Usually, only the 4 big shots would have the right to enter and seek guidance from the saint. However, how long had Ling Han been in the academy for? Yet, he was already being summoned by a saint. Ling Han nodded in understanding. After the Tranquil Heart Saint left, he started to make his way to the Tranquil Heart Pavilion. This time, no one dared to block him. First of all, even an elite at the medium extreme of the Eternal River tier hadn't been able to block him. Thus, if an elite at the high extreme or consummate level didn't step forward, who would dare to block him? Second of all, he had been summoned by a saint. Who dared to make a saint wait? It's that large black dog. Fuck. The despicable dog has appeared again. Beat it to death. However, the attention of the disciples was instantly drawn away by the large black dog. Everyone stared at the large black dog. Just then, they had been completely focused on the teachings of the saint. As a result, they only discovered the large black dog now. Several thousand disciples instantly charged forward, all of them wearing menacing expressions. It was as if they wanted to swallow the large black dog whole. What kind of deplorable sin had the large black dog committed? He had actually attracted the fury of so many people. Ling Han expressed sympathy in his mind. However, he didn't stop to help. It wasn't long before he arrived before the Tranquil Heart Pavilion. In fact, this was just a small courtyard that had a small pavilion within it. There was an air of antiquity about this place. There was a young boy standing before the gate of the courtyard, and upon seeing Ling Han, he immediately said, "It's senior brother Ling Han, am I right? The saint said that you can enter by yourself." Ling Han glanced at the young boy. He was at the Eternal River tier. Moreover, he was far older than his outward appearance would suggest. There were wrinkles on his head, and there was more so a feeling of age and death emanating from his body. This was most likely an old man who had already lived for hundreds of millions of years and followed the Tranquil Heart Saint the entire time. However, the lifespan of a small saint was a whopping 1 billion years. Thus, even though this old man belonged to the same generation as the Tranquil Heart Saint, he was already in old age, while the Tranquil Heart Saint was still young and full of vigor. Cultivation was a cruel matter. If one couldn't continue to advance, they would eventually be eroded by age and pass away. Ling Han sighed in emotion as he entered the courtyard. From the outside, the courtyard appeared to be very quaint. However, upon entering, he discovered that there was a whole different world inside. A vast sea appeared before him, and there were countless azure lotuses blossoming in this sea. Each lotus was tens of thousands of meters tall. Before this sea, even ginormous demonic beast would feel minuscule and insignificant. In fact, if one observed this sea from the outside, they would realize that this was simply an ordinary pond that was filled with ordinary lotuses. Transforming a pond into a sea and transforming the lotuses into gigantic azure peaks, this was the action of a saint. Meanwhile, the tranquil heart saint was sitting on a lotus far away in the distance, a fishing rod in his hands. He was clearly hundreds of thousands of kilometers from Ling Han, yet Ling Han could still somehow see him clearly. This wasn't because his vision was incredible, but rather because the tranquil heart saint was like the ruler of this heaven and earth. Ling Han activated the star-plucking step and hurried toward the saint. His speed was extraordinary, yet after advancing for a while, he discovered that the distance between him and the tranquil heart saint hadn't decreased at all. In fact, the distance between them had become even greater. He was clearly dashing forward, and the tranquil heart saint clearly hadn't moved. So, why had the distance between them become even greater? Ling Han stopped where he was. He observed his surroundings carefully, and a look of realization eventually appeared on his face. This was a formation. The Sea of Azure Lotuses was in fact a formation. This was a peculiar formation that was constructed from the petals and stems of the lotuses. Ling Han started to observe and resolve the formation. The tranquil heart saint smiled upon seeing this. To discover that he was trapped inside a formation so quickly wasn't an easy feat among all of his disciples. Ling Han could rank inside the top 10. However, discovering and resolving the formation were two completely different matters. In any case, this wasn't a difficult formation, and he wanted to see how long Ling Han would need to resolve it. Yu Susu had spent 6 days, Ren Feiyun had spent 9.5 days, and Kai Miao had spent 10.5 days. The tranquil heart saint was aware that Ling Han possessed extraordinary talent in cultivation. Thus, in the beginning, he hadn't expected for Ling Han to be outstanding in the area of formations. However, while teaching on the public square, he had glanced at Ling Han and been astonished to discover that there were actually 10 formations inscribed inside his body. As someone who cherished talented disciples, he decided to summon Ling Han to his courtyard. He would put some effort into raising Ling Han as long as he could resolve the formation within 20 days. It didn't matter if he wasn't exceptionally talented with formations. He was able to inscribe 10 formations inside his body, after all, so wouldn't this be enough to overcome any deficiency in talent? Ling Han analyzed the formation for 3 days before shaking his head. His foundational knowledge of formations was severely lacking, and thus he would most likely need in excess of 20 days to resolve this formation. However, he understood that this was a test from the Tranquil Heart Saint. Moreover, he didn't know what time limit the Tranquil Heart Saint had in mind. Thus, he was starting to become a little worried. He couldn't genuinely spend 20 days, could he? Moreover, that would be the best-case scenario. Since that was the case, he would use the simplest method, brute force. Chapter 1481, Resolving the Formation Using Brute Strength. Cultivation could be boiled down to a single notion: those who were more powerful would achieve victory. What did it matter if one didn't understand martial arts techniques or secret technique? As long as they were powerful enough, they could still shatter heavenly bodies, galaxies, or even an entire universe with a single punch. That being the case, would there still be any unresolvable formations or unbeatable foes in the world? When formation grandmasters resolved formations, they naturally approached it from the perspective of formations. However, Ling Han wasn't a formation grandmaster, and thus he didn't need to be limited by this thinking. He threw a punch at the azure lotus before him. Wang! The azure lotus measured several thousand meters in diameter, and Ling Han's punch sent countless ripples through the surface of the petals of the lotus. The force of his punch was evenly distributed over the entire lotus. With this being the case, Ling Han couldn't cause any damage to the Azure Lotus. The Tranquil Heart Saint couldn't help but shake his head. Would he have used this formation to examine his disciples if it were so easy to resolve? You should follow the rules and use your knowledge of formations to resolve this formation. However, Ling Han wasn't discouraged. The formation patterns inside his body lit up as he activated all 10 of the killing formations. He then unleashed their power through the lightning sword technique as he slashed at the Azure Lotus before him. Pooh! His attack was far more domineering this time. In fact, even the formation patterns of the lotus were unable to fully dissipate the power of his attack. A gash 3 meters long appeared on the lotus. However, just the size of the lotus that was above the sea already measured tens of thousands of meters in height. Its width was more so several thousand meters in diameter. As such, how effective was a gash of a foot deep and 3 meters long? Moreover, the Azure Lotus also possessed an extremely powerful recovery ability. In any case, wood element beings were naturally strong in recovery. Azure liquid started to seep out from the wound, quickly healing the gash and forming a scab. The Tranquil Heart Saint sighed in emotion upon seeing this. On one hand, he was quite astonished by what he saw. This was because he was unable to inscribe 10 identical level formations inside his body, even as Saint who had achieved his Tao through formations. Moreover, the might that was unleashed by the 10 formations inscribed inside Ling Han's body was truly terrifying. Even he couldn't help but nod in admiration. If he could inscribe 10 formations inside his body, he would definitely be invincible among all of the small saints. This young man was genuinely a supreme prodigy. On the other hand, however, he felt that Ling Han was far too naive to use this kind of brute force method to resolve the ancient Azure Lotus formation. How could he possibly succeed? This doesn't work either. Ling Han pondered for a moment before retrieving the divine demon sword. He then slashed at the Azure Lotus again. Sorry about this. This was a celestial tool, and although its might hadn't been fully unlocked yet, the murderous aura that it released would still be powerful enough to kill whatever it struck. Shwa! The formation patterns of the Azure Lotus were instantly slashed apart by the sword. Murderous aura burst into the surroundings, and the entire Azure Lotus shuddered before withering at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. The destructive ability of celestial tools was far too terrifying. Although the divine demon sword wasn't a genuine celestial tool yet, this was only the immortal realm, after all. Thus, its attacks were still devastating and fatal. It wasn't long before the Azure Lotus completely withered and died. Along with it, the formation patterns were naturally destroyed as well. Tranquil Heart Saint. A string of curses raced through his mind. Ling Han had used the most unlikely method to resolve his formation. The saint couldn't help but feel astonished. At the same time, however, he also wanted to grumble and curse. Fortunately, there weren't any outsiders with him. Otherwise, if he had discussed this ancient Azure Lotus formation with them, and told them that it would be impossible to resolve with brute strength, he would definitely have had his face slapped right now. What a freakish young man. Upon seeing Ling Han raise his sword and slash at another Azure Lotus, the Tranquil Heart Saint hurriedly shouted, "Stop, stop, it's extremely difficult for me to nurture even one Azure Lotus." He reached over and directly grabbed onto Ling Han. He then retracted his arm and tossed Ling Han onto the petal leaf of the Azure Lotus that he was sitting on. Ling Han plunked onto the lotus leaf. This was clearly a lotus leaf, yet he still felt a sharp pain shoot through his rear. The saint had definitely done this on purpose. "Didn't I just slash one of your lotuses? Is there any need for this? How petty." His expression also mirrored his thoughts. Upon seeing this, the face of the Tranquil Heart Saint almost twisted in anger. Were these Azure Lotuses ordinary lotuses? These were lotuses that could be inscribed with level 16 formation patterns. As such, they were already nearing the saint level. In fact, they were only a small step away from becoming saintly medicine. He had spent an exorbitant amount of time and effort to nurture these lotuses. In any case, this formation wasn't simply a formation to examine his disciples with. Rather, it also had another much more important use. That was, he could fuse these countless azure lotuses together and transform them into a mother lotus. By doing so, the lotus would break through to level 16 and become a genuine saintly medicine. At that time, he could harvest the lotus heart and have the hardship alchemy saint refine it for him. This lotus heart might then cause the barrier in his cultivation to loosen. If he were lucky, he might even be able to break through to the medium extreme. However, Ling Han had just slashed and killed one of the lotuses. How could he not feel distressed? Even so, there was nothing much that he could say or do. After all, it was he who had invited Ling Han to resolve the formation. Moreover, he hadn't stated that he couldn't use god tools or other items. Thus, he could only swallow this result. Ling Han was probably the first disciple to make a saint feel so gloomy. Ling Han clasped his hands in respect, and said, "Greetings, Saint." The tranquil heart saint waved his hand in acknowledgement. He then forcefully suppressed his gloomy emotion, and said, "You've inscribed 10 yin-yang 5-element formations inside your body?" "Yes," Ling Han replied with a nod. He knew that he couldn't hide this from the saint. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been summoned by the saint in the first place. "Your bones are truly astonishing," the tranquil heart saint remarked. He couldn't help but praise Ling Han's godly bones. Fortunately, he wasn't aware that the toughness of Ling Han's godly bones would also increase as Ling Han grew stronger. Otherwise, his eyes would become green with envy. He thought the Ling Han's godly bones were only this tough because he had ingested some natural treasure. Ling Han naturally wouldn't explain this to him. He simply nodded, silently accepting the saint's statement. The tranquil heart saint wore a strange expression, and said, "You possess astonishing talent in cultivation, and your physique is also quite unique. Although you're not very talented with formations, you were still able to achieve the notion of using your body as a formation to the extreme." Could it be that his most suitable successor was going to be this amateur in formations? "I have high hopes of you," the saint continued. "In half a year, there'll be a competition among all of the newly recruited disciples. If you win this competition, you'll receive saintly origin as a reward." Ling Han's heart thumped in excitement. Saintly origin. This was a precious treasure that was formed when saints used their power of construction to extract the essence of heaven and earth. Saintly origin could elevate one's cultivation, and it could even help with their comprehension. It was indescribably valuable. Even saints would have to pay a huge price if they wanted to refine saintly origin. Thus, they might not even be able to refine a block in several million years. "I must obtain this. I believe this shouldn't be too difficult," Ling Han said with confidence. The tranquil heart saint couldn't help but laugh loudly. However, he immediately shook his head, and said, "You're far too confident. Perhaps you still don't know that Gu Daoyi has already advanced to the Eternal River tier. Moreover, his battle prowess is incredible. In fact, he can even battle against elites at the high extreme." "Already?" Ling Han was astonished. However, he immediately recalled that Gu Daoyi had once been a severing mundane tier elite. As such, his cultivation level would naturally rise in a steady manner at least before he reached the severing mundane tier again. There was no way that he would come across any obstructions. Moreover, he also possessed a divine fetus, and thus his growth would naturally be extremely smooth as long as he accumulated enough origin power. Although Ling Han had inscribed 10 killing formations inside his body, the peak of their destructive ability was only on par with the early stage of the high extreme. Thus, it was unclear what the results would be if he were to battle against Gu Daoyi. He had to advance to the Eternal River tier within half a year. Chapter 1482 Breaking Through to the Eternal River tier. Once he advanced to the Eternal River tier, Ling Han was confident that he would be unrivaled among those at the same cultivation level. Moreover, his godly bones would also advance another level and allow him to inscribe level 15 formations. When 10 identical formations were activated together, his battle prowess would definitely soar to the early stage of the consummate level. Of course, this was only if he chose the most powerful level 15 formations. Otherwise, the 10 formations might only raise his battle prowess to the middle stage of the high extreme. However, there was only half a year for him to prepare, and thus he most likely didn't have enough time to grasp a new formation to inscribe onto his godly bones. He would advance to the Eternal River tier first before worrying about this. He was already trailing Gu Daoyi, and he definitely couldn't slip even further behind. Moreover, many king tiers had only suppressed their cultivation and not broken through in order to fight for the opportunity at the Sunken Abyss Valley. Now that they didn't need to hold back anymore, it was easy to imagine that there would be an explosive increase of new Eternal River tier elites. Long Xianyue, second in the world, and Hong Ma were all examples of this. Ling Han took his leave from the Tranquil Heart Saint's courtyard. He had received acknowledgement from the Tranquil Heart Saint, and thus he could seek him out and ask for guidance if he had any questions about formations. Of course, the saint wouldn't offer guidance every time Ling Han had a question. This would depend on whether the saint had the time, and also whether he was in the mood. Ling Han immediately entered the Black Tower after arriving back at his residence. He then started to cultivate in seclusion so that he could strive toward the Eternal River tier. In reality, he had already accumulated enough origin power. The only thing he was missing now was comprehension. He started to earnestly comprehend Tao under the reincarnation tree. Countless realizations surfaced in his mind, the universe playing out a scene of birth and destruction and a scene of chaos to order. Countless heavenly bodies dazzled in his mind, their radiance brilliant and unparalleled. Advancing from the heavenly body tier to the Eternal River tier was a significant step. A heavenly body tier cultivator could only wield at most 5 heavenly bodies. Moreover, this was only if they advanced to the pinnacle level. However, Eternal River tier elites would be in control of limitless possibilities. How many heavenly bodies could a silver river hold? Innumerable. Thus, after advancing to the Eternal River tier, those at the early stage of the low extreme would possess 4 heavenly bodies. Meanwhile, those at the middle stage would possess at least 10, those at the late stage would possess at least 20, and those at the peak stage would possess at least 40. Only after forming 100 heavenly bodies would one be considered to reach the medium extreme. The high extreme would require 1,000 heavenly bodies, while the consummate level would require 10,000 heavenly bodies. Theoretically speaking, Eternal River tier elites could form countless heavenly bodies. Thus, it was even possible that they could surpass the power of saints. This was because a cultivator would have reached the peak stage of the consummate level after forming 100,000 heavenly bodies. At that time, they would have the right to attempt breaking through to the Genesis tier. However, breaking through to the Genesis tier wasn't reliant on the number of heavenly bodies alone. In addition to this, one would also need to comprehend the power of construction. If one couldn't comprehend this, then it would be useless even if they formed 1 million heavenly bodies. It was because of this that there were the strange occurrences of Eternal River tier elites possessing more power than Genesis tier saints. Of course, these Eternal River tier elites would only be more powerful than low-level saints. This was because the power of saints was still derived from the heavenly bodies inside their silver river. From the base of 100,000 heavenly bodies, they could surge forward and form 500,000 or even 1 million heavenly bodies. However, power wasn't the most important benchmark when considering the strength of a saint. Rather, it was their grasp of the power of construction. If a saint constructed a world, they would be the ruler of that world. Thus, what use would it be regardless of how powerful their opponent was? They wouldn't be able to wield their strength at all. Thus, starting from the Genesis tier, the power of regulations would be superior to just power alone. This was because saints, to some extent, represented heaven and earth. One might possess extraordinary power, but could they be more powerful than the heavens? In fact, it was regarding the power of regulations where the immortal realm and netherworld started to diverge. The former comprehended the power of construction, while the latter comprehended the power of destruction. These were juxtaposing powers, and they were like black to white and fire to water. Ling Han continued to experience all kinds of comprehensions. The sounds of Tao were reverberating inside his body, and his godly bones clanked as if in reply. After an unknown amount of time, a small river suddenly appeared inside his dantian. However, it wasn't water that was flowing through this river. Rather, it was the light of the galaxy. This was an eternal river. His 5 heavenly bodies were immediately absorbed into this river. They continued to glow in the eternal river, and they more so expanded a whopping 100 times in size. This signified that his reserves for origin power had expanded 100-fold. He was immediately struck by an intense feeling of hunger. This wasn't hunger from his stomach, but rather hunger from his heavenly bodies. They were far too empty, and they needed to be fed. Moreover, their food was none other than origin power. Ling Han hurriedly retrieved and ingested a large number of great amplification pills. If they weren't fed enough origin power, these heavenly bodies would start to extract energy from his life force. If his life force were completely consumed, he would be sucked dry and turn into a corpse. With a single mouthful, he ingested over 50 great amplification pills. Only then did his feeling of intense hunger start to subside. After ingesting another dozen or so pills, he finally felt half full. He now needed to face heavenly tribulation. Ling Han exited the Black Tower. In fact, he didn't know how long he had cultivated in seclusion for. If it had been in excess of half a year, then he would have no choice but to accept his bad luck. He strode out of the academy and awaited the arrival of his heavenly tribulation in a barren desert. Boom! Dark clouds formed overhead, arcs of brilliant lightning flashing within them. Come! Ling Han was naturally unafraid. This was only an ordinary heavenly tribulation, and it was far from powerful enough to faze him. He actively shattered his godly bones so that they could be tempered by heavenly tribulation. At the same time, he observed the might of heavenly tribulation so that he could improve his grasp of heaven's might. The heaven's might of this heavenly tribulation was actually weaker than the previous time. Ling Han couldn't help but sigh in emotion. A twofold heavenly tribulation was truly terrifying. He definitely didn't want to experience it again. Half a day passed, and Ling Han circulated a drop of indestructible true fluid. This allowed him to rapidly recover. His godly bones were smooth and crystal-like, and the formation patterns that were inscribed on them also started to reappear. These formation patterns had already become a part of his body. Unless he actively abandoned them, they would reappear with a single thought. I've finally broken through to the eternal river tier. A smile stretched across his face. Hunyo had once said that she would wait several hundred years for him. By the looks of it, she hadn't been exaggerating. He would indeed need to cultivate for several hundred years before he had the right to open the barrier to the celestial realm. He returned to his residence, where Empress Wenxin and Biyao were both waiting for him. He exchanged a glance with Empress Wenxin, and a smile instantly appeared on both of their faces. They had both broken through to the eternal river tier. Congratulations, Master. Congratulations, Mrs. Biyao said. Ling Han nodded in acknowledgement and said, your cultivation level hasn't lagged behind either. Not bad. The Star Sand Martial Arts Academy was extremely difficult to enter. However, after entering it, one would be provided with an astonishing amount of resources. With a saint looking over them, what kind of natural treasures couldn't they obtain? Moreover, there was also the hardship alchemy saint who had achieved his Tao through alchemy, a saint who was obsessed with refining pills. Each of the 9 campuses would receive a fair share of the godly medicines that he provided. Biyao was already nearing the late stage of the low extreme of the heavenly body tier. His advance was astounding. Of course, this was also because he was sufficiently talented in cultivation. Otherwise, just alchemical pills alone wouldn't have been enough. What day is it? When is the competition between the new disciples? Ling Han asked. Master, you've exited seclusion at just the right time. There are still around 15 days until the competition begins, and we're preparing to head off in 2 days' time, Biyao replied. Ling Han nodded in reply. What a coincidental timing. Elites like them might need to undergo comprehension for several years if they were to come across a slightly challenging barrier. However, his advance this time had been surprisingly quick and smooth. It was because of this that he had been able to complete his advance in just half a year's time. If he had come across any barriers, he would have needed several more years to break through. Many people are unhappy with the previous ranking, and they're all fired up to prove themselves in this upcoming competition between new disciples, Empress Wenxin said. Ling Han nodded upon hearing this. Fighting spirit burned in his eyes, and he said, this time, I'm going to defeat Gu Daoi fair and square. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.